Okay. Audio quality is probably, but hopefully everything else is fine. Recording this on my phone with a new tripod. I have decided that I am going to play pretty much every single Legend of Zelda game in chronological order, and I'm going to beat them all before the release of Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom next year. This would turn out to be the biggest mistake I'd made in years. Hello ladies, gentlemen, and comrades against the binary. My name is Sorio99, and for the past 3 months I have been playing through all the main series Zelda games, and my brain is broken now. This project has been a long time coming. In fact, you could argue I've been working on it since I was like 7. And now, I've beaten all of them, and my brain has been completely destroyed. I don't even know where to begin. I've been playing Zelda games basically my whole life, ever since I was old enough to hold a GameCube controller. I would play the Zelda Collector's Edition and Wind Waker all of the time as a kid. I'd show you those games here, but my brother took them with him when he moved out, along with our GameCube. The asshole. I played those games for years, but I don't actually remember beating any of the games back then. I definitely wasn't that great at video gaming back then. Actually, true story, the first game I ever beat on my own without my brother helping me beat it was Super Paper Mario on the Wii. So, yeah, probably says a lot about my skill level. But in October last year, I had a really good idea. Or rather, I thought I did. Do I think this is a good idea? No. Okay, so maybe I didn't. Over a period of 3 months, I have played through Zelda 1, Zelda 2, A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening on Switch, Ocarina of Time and Ocarina of Time 3D, Majora's Mask and Majora's Mask 3D, Oracle of Seasons, Oracle of Ages, Four Swords Anniversary Edition, Wind Waker HD, Four Swords Adventures, Minish Cap, Twilight Princess HD, Phantom Hourglass, Spirit Track, Skyward Sword HD, A Link Between Worlds, and Breath of the Wild. And I've beaten all of them, in that order. For reference, here's a list of the other games I beat during that time. I haven't beat any other games. And now, the question is, what was it like playing through all of these games? And do I recommend you do the same? No. No, I do not. Do not do what I have done. You still have time. Save yourself! So, let's start at the beginning, where the Zelda series started. The first Zelda game was created primarily by 2 people, Shigeru Miyamoto and Takashi Tezuka. Most people probably think of Miyamoto or Aonuma when Zelda comes up, but really Tezuka has been quite a guiding force for the series since the beginning. He's cited in the credits of almost every game I just listed, and he's been working on the series' script since the very first game. Admittedly, starting with Ocarina of Time, he's mostly taken on the role of supervisor and occasionally producer, but considering Aonuma only started with Ocarina of Time and Miyamoto's basically credited in any first-party Nintendo games, I still think Tezuka gets overlooked a bit much. The original Zelda was produced right alongside the original Super Mario Bros. By the same team, no less, and was essentially envisioned as the anti-Mario. Mario was a side-scroller, Zelda was top-down. Mario included a source system like arcade games, Zelda didn't. Mario was so linear that skipping levels was considered a reward. Zelda was so non-linear that they had to make a roadblock at the start of the final dungeon so you couldn't just skip the rest of the game. It's kind of interesting to think how hard they worked to keep the 2 games completely different, especially considering how closely connected the series would end up becoming. Still, I guess it isn't that relevant to the game itself, I just thought it was interesting to bring up. By the way, I hope you liked that deep dive into the game's development history. We're not doing that again. There's too much ground to cover already. I just beat the first Legend of Zelda game today. I enjoyed it more than I thought I would. I'll give it that. Zelda 1 is a fascinating game to go back to, and thankfully being an NES game, Nintendo will never stop re-releasing it. Seriously, you can play it on the NES, the GameCube, the Game Boy Advance, the Wii, the 3DS, the Wii U, the NES Classic, the Switch. Hell, they even made a version for the SNES that they sent over freaking radio. This is an absolute classic game. Is it okay to admit I've never really liked this game? I'm not sure I'd recommend it still. It's one of those old games. You have to look up a map to know what you're doing most of the time, but looking up a map feels like it's eliminating half the fun of the game. It's not bad, though.
The thing I'd say is it has a lot of potential. That's the word that, sort of defines the game in my head. Potential.
Don't get me wrong, for the time, Zelda 1 is amazing. A big open world to explore in just about any order you want on a console that could barely play Pac-Man is not something to scoff at. And this game basically set the groundwork for just about every adventure game made since.
Problem is, when I review games, I tend not to review them based on how good they were at the time, but how well they've held up and how they play to a modern audience. And that's an issue we're going to run into a lot during this project. The more influential and ahead of time a game is, the more likely it is that later games are going to have surpassed it.
Again, the game is fun, it has a great setup, and even though I didn't play the second quest, I could
Wait. Before we go any further, I should talk about that, shouldn't I? I played through and beat all of these games, all 20, 18, however you count it. But I didn't complete them. I didn't go for 100% in any of these games. And quite honestly, I don't want to. This project took months of dedicated work, and God only knows how long to edit. I didn't also want to go hunting for every last heart piece, treasure chest, and Korok. Anyways,
even though I didn't play the second quest, I could still appreciate how much work had to go into an entire second set of dungeons. The problem is, well, this is the first game of its kind, ever. It's obviously going to be a bit limited. And that's fine, it doesn't have to be perfect, it works perfectly well as a jumping off point for the rest of the series. I just think on its own, from a modern viewpoint, the game just isn't all that great.
I know there's a certain breed of gamer who thinks any game with even slightly more direction in its design is somehow an affront to God and all that is sacred cough. But I feel like there's probably a middle ground between tutorial explaining something you've already done 700 times every 3 seconds, and here's a box of unorganized Lego, build a Death Star. No, not a Lego Death Star, like the actual Death Star, laser and all.
There are also just a lot of really odd design decisions in the game, like instead of just getting individual arrows, once you buy the arrow, shooting the bow takes away a single rupee for each shot.
Also yes, I'm calling them rupees. Shush.
Or random old guys inside random rooms and dungeons who tell you how to beat the bosses. Or the one and only time you need food to progress because a random NPC roadblock demands to be fed, or how keys can be used in any single dungeon regardless of where they're picked up and you can buy them at the shops. And oh yeah, the completely invisible final boss who you have to fight completely blindly.
Again, the game is not bad, I'm not saying that at all. I'm just saying, maybe we shouldn't expect a 37-year-old game to be the bastion of all gaming.
Not bad, but just not great. Nah. Looking forward to Zelda 2, though.
So, I just finished Zelda 2, the second game, obviously. Surprisingly fun.
Zelda 2 is kind of the punching bag of the Zelda series, especially the early games. Like, you think Skyward Sword or the DS games get shat on? Oh, you have no idea. Zelda 2 is weird. Like, Jughead in Riverdale weird. It doesn't want to be anything other than weird, and anyone who looks at it cringes in every possible way. I kind of like it a bit more than Zelda 1.
Well, parts of it at least. Zelda 2 is infamous for playing completely differently from just about any other Zelda game. While there is a top-down exploration-based overworld, the majority of gameplay instead includes side-scrolling and jumping. There's even some light platforming included.
Yeah, remember when I talked about Zelda being the anti-Mario? Well, forget about that. Now the game is basically Mario the JRPG.
It's definitely different. Like, I won't dispute that, obviously. I think the combat system is very, it's more complicated than you would expect for a game of that time. Like, it almost reminds me of the combat system from the 3D Zelda games, which makes sense. Obviously, especially near the end, the difficulty just is absurd. Overall, I thought it was really good. Definitely weird, the RPG elements are odd, but I don't think it's bad.
Zelda 2 takes place not long after the first game, with the same Link, only now he's trying to wake up a sleeping Zelda, because why not? It's also an interesting map in the grand history of Zelda games. Like, this may be the only game in the whole series where Death Mountain is on the southern side of Hyrule instead of the northern. Supposedly this is because the game takes place in Greater Hyrule, an idea that I'm pretty sure has been completely retconned away. Sort of like the idea of leveling up with experience points.
Maybe part of why I don't have as much of an issue with it is because it's just so different from other Zelda games. Like, Zelda 1 still kind of feels like current 2D Zelda games, so the differences feel even weirder. But Zelda 2 feels like a completely different kind of game, so it feels less uncanny. Foreshadowing is a literary...
Don't get me wrong, this isn't all sunshine and rainbows. The gameplay is different, but that doesn't mean it's always good. A lot of the late game enemies are absolutely brutal, especially the Iron Knuckles. There's also the magic system, which is occasionally stupid. Like having a boss that requires an expensive magic spell at the end of a dungeon where standard enemies also require using expensive magic spells. That kind of stupid. And yes, Death Mountain is dumb for an early game maze, even with a map. However, there is genuine good stuff, I promise. The up and down thrust, the Barba boss fight, the experience system. It's all genuinely fun.
Look, I know the common take is that Zelda 2 is the worst game in the series, but like, come on. Four Swords Adventures is right there.
So, now moving on to A Link to the Past, which is the first game in this playthrough that I have fully beat before. So, this should be fun. I have officially beaten A Link to the Past for like fourth time, I think. It's good.
A Link to the Past is the third game in the series and the only preserved entry for the SNES, and a lot of people think it's the best in the series. Am I one of those people? Obviously not.
Something I've always thought about Link to the Past is it's very uncanny. Admittedly, a lot of that has to do with it being a very transitional game. You've got things like, oh, the dungeons are basically as we would expect them from later Zelda games, but the big keys unlock like the item chest and a bunch of less important doors throughout the dungeon, and then you need to pick up the heart container in order to clear the dungeon, which is just odd. And of course the story, because they hadn't fully figured out what exactly they wanted the story to be, and Nintendo of America was still censoring things like religious aspects. Overall, not terrible. Not bad at all, honestly. I can definitely see why this became sort of the format and formula for future Zelda games. I think doing the math, I missed like 15 heart pieces. It's like how I've only gotten all of the Korok seeds like once. Yeah, once.
Here's the thing about Link to the Past. It's a Zelda game. Like, there's very little that sets it apart from every later game. Oh, but what about going to a darker version of the world through specific portals? Yeah, Twilight Princess, Link Between Worlds, and even Oracle of Ages would like a word with you. So, the game is basically just the vanilla Zelda game. The standard, the baseline. Every other Zelda game is defined by how it alters this format.
And that has a definite value. Doesn't mean it's great. There's very little about the game that it does better than any other Zelda game. However, there's also very little it does worse than any other Zelda game. Like, it's basically just Mothula and Land Molo's rocks, and the game is just kind of flawless. But that doesn't exactly make it perfect.
There's also the introduction of a non-old man hit system. Sorta. There's still an old man involved,
who I will go to my grave saying is the same character archetype as the character from Zelda 1 and Rauru and the King of Hyrule. I can prove it!
But instead of finding the old man, you touch a special telepathy panel that in the next 3 2D Zelda games would be replaced by an owl statue. Yeah, it's kinda weird.
Again, I'm not saying it's a bad game. It's good. It's really good. I don't know, okay?
This is also the first Zelda game with a story that's actually, like, part of the game. It starts with Zelda talking to Link telepathically, somehow. Then his uncle goes to save Zelda from the dungeon of the castle, only to die in the sewer leading up to the entrance. Well done, Uncle Ben. Now, give me the spin attack. After we get Zelda to the first ever sage in the series,
who's definitely not a priest, don't even try to say he's a priest,
we're tasked with getting the 3 pendants that unlock the Master Sword. And after we do that, Zelda dies. Oh. Sure hope Zelda getting captured during the game after we've already put effort into helping her doesn't become a trend. And thus, the 2-tier Zelda was born.
Something interesting to note, while the end credits do show all of the dungeons of the game, of which there are about 13, only 8 of them are referred to as levels, specifically the 8 in the Dark World. I don't know what that means, I'm dumb.
So now we have to rescue Zelda and also the other 6 human maidens who are descendants of the, quote, 7 wise men, all while trying to navigate the Dark World, which was once the Golden Land until Ganondorf the Thief stole the full Triforce and corrupted it with his wicked intentions.
Do you see what I mean about the game being uncanny? Like, I can see what they were going for, but it's just weird. Again, I don't think it's bad, it's just weird. Look, I love these games, I really do, but I think I need a break. So, every 3 games or so, I'm going to talk about stuff within the Zelda series. We can't really talk about going bit by bit, game by game. Trust me, this is for both our good.
So, a lot of hay has been made over the years over Zelda games and their formula. However, all 3 games we've played so far are drastically different. An open-world, completely non-linear adventure game, a 2D side-scroller with RPG elements, and a linear adventure between 2 different worlds to save the universe. However, what A Link to the Past did was set the standard that future Zelda games would follow, all the way up to A Link Between Worlds in 2013. And what was this formula? Number 1. The dungeons. Zelda dungeons are basically the core appeal of the series, and the basic setup has stayed mostly the same ever since Link to the Past. Multiple rooms arranged in some specific shape, all themed around 1 or 2 main ideas, with 4 special chests containing a map, a compass, a big key, and the dungeon's item. Typically use the item to clear puzzles you couldn't solve elsewhere in the dungeon, the map shows you how the dungeon is laid out, the big key opens the way to the boss, and also occasionally other things, and the compass shows you where treasure chests are and otherwise wastes your time.
Well, actually, in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask, the compass also lets you see your position more accurately on the mini-map.
Shut up, no one likes you. Number 2. The Overworld. The overworld of the game, connecting the various dungeons, is usually Hyrule. It contains friendly NPCs within specific locations, like towns, monsters spread around the fields, and tons of secrets you can find if you experiment with the items you find in the dungeons. You also need the items to reach certain locations in order to get to subsequent dungeons. You can even find certain side quests if you look in the right places and pay attention to your surroundings, and that will give you special rewards.
And outside of 4 Swords and 4 Swords Adventures, those 2 pieces apply to every single Zelda game from this point forward. And if you think that's lazy, I'm sorry you feel that way. I understand just about everything is a matter of opinion, but you're wrong!
Number 3. 2-tier structuring. Like I mentioned before, after Zelda gets captured in Link to the Past, the game changes pretty drastically, and the player is sent on a second journey through an altered version of the world, complete with a brand new set of MacGuffins to chase down. This would end up being imitated in every single 3D Zelda game except Majora's Mask and Breath of the Wild, and it even appears in a decent number of 2D games. Even when there isn't a hard separation between one set of dungeons and a second, there's more often than not some dual world idea going on, like the past and present in Oracle of Ages, or the larger world and the Minish world in Minish Cap.
And if there isn't either, then again, you're probably playing 4 Swords. Or Majora's Mask, I guess.
Number 4. There is no number 4. This segment is over now.
So, now we have the first game of the Zelda series. Feels like it's growing, progressing, becoming more advanced. What's our next step? What's our big move? Where do we go from here? A fucking original Game Boy game? Fantastic!
It is a little past 9:30. And I have just completed the remake of Link's Awakening. Good. I've beaten it a few times. Didn't 100% it this time.
So, for the record, I decided to mainly play through the most recent, most updated, and available version of each game that I could. It's really only relevant starting here, since it means I didn't play much of the original Game Boy game. Sorry if that joke gave you higher expectations. To be fair, I did play up to the first dungeon in the DX version of Link's Awakening on 3DS. So I know how it plays and how it works, and I can talk about that. And it's not like I didn't play any other major Game Boy Zelda games for this project that use the same engine, cough.
I've played Link's Awakening on Switch a fair number of times before this project, but that's mainly because, well, 1, it's on Switch, but also 2, because it's a damn good game.
It's good. It is obviously being a remake made years after the original. You know, there are obviously differences from the original, but overall, from what I can tell between the two, not that much was changed. It is surprising just how close it is to, like, the more modern version of Zelda. Honestly, in some ways, it's more the originator of the modern Zelda formula than Link to the Past, which is surprising for a Game Boy game. overall, I had a good time with it. You know, I really like it.
Link's Awakening starts with Link, fresh off some heroic victory against Ganon and a tiny sailboat in the middle of the ocean, and then he dies. Oh.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of forced difficulty, so killing the player before they press the button should probably be points off.
Luckily, we aren't actually dead. We're just on a weird island with a giant egg mountain, Mario enemies everywhere, a feather that can make us jump, a weird number of 2D platforming sections, and the knowledge that we can't ever leave unless we wake something called the Windfish, and now this owl's going to tell us how to escape, which we find out later involves killing every living being inhabiting the island because it turns out this whole place is just a fucking space whale's dream.
Spoilers for a 30-year-old game, by the way. Well, like it's the most famous plot point in the whole game.
As far as I can tell, the only changes to the game's script in the remake are modifying the tutorial kids to be slightly more relevant and Dante. This remake is clearly trying to be very loyal to the original. Like, we aren't quite at Brilliant Diamond and Shining Pearl levels, but we aren't very far off. You can still only move in 8 directions, and the game's toy-like art style is clearly made to resemble the original game's more limited graphics, which makes sense. A lot of people hated this art style when it was announced, and while I get why, I feel like the complaints were a bit overblown.
Now, as faithful as this remake is, it's still pretty damn different to play. I mostly put that down to the change in system, which makes sense. The original Link's Awakening was built for the original Game Boy. A device with 2 face buttons, a start button and select button, and about 7 pixels of screen space. The Switch has 4 face buttons, shoulder buttons, and control sticks. Do the math.
One of the biggest problems with the original Link's Awakening is that you only have 2 buttons to work with, and unlike the original Zelda games, you don't just hold your shield and deflect automatically. Every item, including your sword, running boots, lifting, all that has to be assigned to either A or B. On the Switch, we have a lot more to work with. The sword is always assigned to the B button, the shield is on right bumper, you have X and Y to use specific items, the left bumper to dash, the power bracelets that let you lift stuff are always equipped, and the A button handles interactions and lifting stuff. I have heard some people complain that the game doesn't also auto-assign the Rock's Feather to a button, since that's the item that lets you jump, and jumping is surprisingly important to this game, so you basically always have to have the feather equipped, and only really have 1 free item slot.
So you have to go into your equipment screen to trade out items whenever a new one is needed, as opposed to the original, where you have to go into your equipment screen every time you change rooms. Like, I do get why it's an issue for some people, but it's not like it's some major deal breaker. People played this game on a damn break. Are you really gonna complain about playing it on a dinner platter?
Well, while that's the main change covered, there are a couple big additions from the original Link's Awakening. I mean, a couple does mean 2. The Color Dungeon from Link's Awakening DX is brought into this version with a few changes to accommodate the colorblind, which is nice. The dungeon is completely optional, all you get for clearing it is the choice between doubled defense or doubled attack.
Is that supposed to be unimportant?
The other big addition, and the most original part of the remake, is Dompe's Chamber Dungeon. Meh.
Yeah, the chamber dungeons are fine. Some of the challenges are interesting to clear, but honestly there just isn't all that much to the mode. You just put down the rooms for dungeons you've already cleared with only a few chambers exclusive to the mode. You can't share the dungeons you make without trading amiibo, there's no way to create your own chambers, and the chambers are limited to 1-screen rooms. Like, it's fine as a little puzzle thing, but it doesn't feel like much more than that.
So, yeah, one kinda interesting extra dungeon from the Game Boy Color version, and one original edition that gets old about halfway through. What a ripoff! Now all we have is the best version of Link's Awakening ever made!
Oh, sorry, I forgot to put the sarcasm warning at the start of the video.
Link's Awakening is an amazing Zelda game, okay? The dungeons are all uniquely designed with incredibly creative gimmicks. Koholint Island is completely unique compared to other Zelda worlds, even other non-Hyrule worlds. We even have friendly Chimchomps and Kirby, because why not? It's a dream, we don't have to make sense.
Well, that explains a lot.
Trust me, this is one of the best 2D Zelda games ever made, which makes sense considering what this game directly led into.
Next up is Ocarina of Time, which I'm gonna play through twice, because why not? Okay, I have just completed Ocarina of Time for the N64 and Ocarina of Time 3D. That took a while.
I played through Ocarina of Time and Ocarina of Time 3D at the same time, trading off between the N64 and later on Switch and the 3DS version. I switched after learning Zelda's Lullaby, after arriving at Goron Village, after getting in front of Lord Jabu Jabu, after receiving the Master Sword, and then after each of the adult dungeons.
Overall, it took me 10 days of playing nothing but Ocarina of Time in order to beat both games. And I discovered I'm not too fond of Ocarina of Time.
Ocarina of Time. I get why people like it. It is a good game, just objectively. Not as good as everyone says. I don't know. I don't like it that much. I feel like pretty much everything that Ocarina of Time does that's good, other Zelda games have done since better. My perspective on things like this has always been, if someone does the exact same thing as you better, then they've just outdone you. Again, I get why it was so influential. I know why every 3D Zelda game after this was basically just Ocarina of Time, but X, up until Breath of the Wild. On its own, I just don't like it that much.
I'd say the internet is going to crucify me, but that would require the internet to actually see this video.
Look, I admit, my perspective on this game isn't necessarily unbiased. Not only did I grow up in a post-Ocarina world, I was playing the N64 version on the Nintendo Switch. The simulator is so bad I basically became a game reviewer in order to bitch about it. Is it possible that this made the experience worse for me? Absolutely. But I don't think it's the only problem. Like, the big complaints about the N64 service are that games look worse and added in bugs. I don't think it's what made Link's moving speed about 1 mile an hour.
Though let it be known, I am often wrong.
The game just feels clunky to go back to, especially on any console that isn't an N64. Like, GameCube on, every port of this game maps the C buttons onto the right analog stick, and I'm sorry, it just doesn't work that well. There's absolutely no manual camera control outside of the Z targeting, the first phase of Twin Rova is completely obnoxious, the Water Temple... Enough said.
Seriously, it feels like all the Ocarina fans are like, oh, it's the best game ever made, absolutely none of the problems ruining Zelda today, this game is perfect! Have you played it in the past 2 decades?
So, we begin in the Kokiri Forest, filled with the Kokiri, children who never grow up and all have fairies, except for Link, who doesn't have a fairy and grows up to look like this. One day, the guardian deity of the forest, the Deku Tree, finally sends him a fairy, right before giving him a rock and dying.
I've heard worse calls to action.
So we set off to find Princess Zelda and find out our quest is to stop the wicked man from the desert, Ganondorf, who Zelda knows is evil from looking at him because... his... eyes?
Look, I could plan, write, and record an entire video essay about this game's relationship with race, but I do not have the energy to edit it, and I don't have the energy to deal with the inevitable shitstorm of comments. All I'll say is, yes, Ocarina of Time has serious problems with race, and no, liking it doesn't mean you're inherently racist. Okay? Okay. God, if this video gets even 50 views, I'm going to get doxxed, and the section is less than 1% of the script.
So we get the remaining spiritual stones from the Gorons and Zora, only for Ganondorf to... Well, I always assume this is where he kills the King of Hyrule, since it's when he first attacks the castle, but technically I don't think that's ever been officially said. Anyways, we get the Ocarina of Time, roll credits, open the Door of Time and the Temple of Time with the Song of Time, and prove ourselves as the hero of time by pulling the Master Sword.
Oh man, we were on a roll!
So, we pull the sword, then we get put into a coma for 7 years while Ganondorf steals part of the Triforce and takes over Hyrule. Well done, Master Sword. Any other smart ideas? We'll get there.
Yeah, in half a year.
So now we have to go around in the future cleaning up Ganondorf's mess and saving 5 of the sages, which is actually interesting. During the 7 years Link was sealed away, the Kokiri Forest and Goron Village have been almost completely abandoned, Death Mountain is constantly erupting, and Lake Hylia has been almost completely drained. But, as we clear the first 3 adult dungeons, we restore these areas to the same level of majesty and inhabitants as when Link was a child. It's not that integral of an idea, admittedly, you can't save most of the Zoras, and the last 2 dungeons don't have touch the idea, but it's still a nice little gimmick to justify the time skip. Other than that, we've got a lot of girls who hit on Link.
Be honest, ladies. Would ya?
Yeah, a bunch of sources online say this game was supposed to originally have dating sim elements, hence why there are so many female characters with unique designs and semi-important roles in the plot who all seem to have some form of romantic interest in Link. It's believable, sure, but I've yet to see what supposed interviews confirm this was ever actually supposed to be a part of the game.
I'm not saying it's definitely false, but I do think it's very possible that this was just something a fan or non-official source came up with that managed to catch on.
That being said, I would love to see the timeline in which that feature actually made it in. Like, imagine what the world would be like if one of, if not the most influential 3D video games ever made let you actively date a fish girl. I'm not saying it's the alternate universe I most want to be real, but I'm not saying it isn't either.
Is the game well made? Yes. It's the first 3D Zelda game, and it's built exactly like a 3D Zelda game should be. Sure, the child dungeons are built a bit less like standard Zelda dungeons, no keys of any kind, but otherwise, these are the blueprint for 3D Zelda dungeons. That's not always a good thing, but usually it is.
Overall, I don't think the game is bad, but I really don't think anyone needs to actually play it. Yeah, they should just play the 3DS version.
As for the 3DS version, I liked it a bit more. It's still the same game, I do have some of the same problems with it. It's a lot smoother to play, the graphics are better obviously, some of the controls feel a bit more natural. Even little things like just having 4 item slots and having the Ocarina not take up an item slot, Ocarina of Time 3D just feels like a better version of Ocarina of Time, if that makes any sense.
That's right, I didn't play through 18 full games for this project, I played through 20! And you know that because I want to strangle Eiji Aonuma!
Okay, let's keep this one short. Ocarina of Time 3D is an upgrade from Ocarina of Time in just about every way. Combat and item usage are smoother and easier to pull off, aiming is a lot easier even if you don't use gyro controls, there are more control options, certain cutscenes have been modified to look and read a little better, and the game looks better. Still no camera controls, and the guidance stones can be a little bit condescending, but otherwise, yeah, the 3D version is better than the original.
Realistically, I probably didn't need to play both versions of Ocarina of Time. I mostly consider Ocarina 3D to be similar to Link's Awakening on Switch, and that's arguably a good thing. I guess I just did it because, well, I had to do it for the sequel.
So now it is on to Majora's Mask, which I think will probably be shorter overall. I have just beaten Majora's Mask and Majora's Mask 3D. That was a lot of fun.
Once again, I played both the Switch N64 version of this game and the 3DS version. Infamously, Majora's Mask has a lot of changes of questionable quality from the original Majora's Mask. So I pretty much had to play through both versions here to see which is better, which is worse, and whether we still need to burn Grizzle's office to the ground.
I get the hype around Majora's Mask, I think Majora's Mask is overall an improvement over Ocarina of Time. I think it's more fun. A lot of the design is better. Great Bay, not so much. Otherwise, it is a lot of fun. It's very engrossing, I guess is the word. You have all these different quests and side quests and games to play, and it's a lot of fun. It is so easy to have fun with that game. I think I prefer the 3D version a little bit over the N64 version. It is a very subjective thing, I know. I can understand a lot of the complaints people have with the game. This is nowhere near the level of improvement of like Ocarina of Time to Ocarina of Time 3D. There are a lot of differences that are not necessarily better. I can understand pretty much all of them, but there are differences that are, debatable. That said, there are still a lot of changes that are just straight up improvements, Like, I think a lot of quality of life additions, especially, it's complicated. But those are my thoughts on Majora's Mask.
Or rather, those are some of my thoughts. I guess I should probably go into a little more detail.
Majora's Mask sends the Link from Ocarina of Time into a brand new world, devastated by the whims of a random wood kid wearing the titular mask. You have to save the whole of Termina within 72 hours, and all you have is a sassy fairy, a random demigod who sells masks, and a magical instrument that can manipulate time, teleport, and heal almost any curse.
Oh no, this will surely be impossible.
This is a very different structure for a Zelda game. Majora's Mask has the fewest dungeons of any Zelda game ever, with the possible exception of Breath of the Wild, but even then I'd consider something like Hyrule Castle as a full dungeon, not to mention the DLC. Majora's Mask? 4 dungeons, period. Sure, there are some mini-dungeons that the wikis will list, but 3 are completely optional. One is basically just the Gerudo Fortress but with water, and all that's left is the Gibdo Maze and the Skeleton Castle, and none of these have Zelda dungeon staples like maps. Instead, we have 4 dungeons, well made and unique among the Zelda pantheon. Except Great Bay. Great Bay Temple sucks.
And yes, that goes for both the original and 3DS versions. It is that bad. Like, I'm more okay with the retooled Zora gameplay and the remake than most people. I actually think it works pretty well. Sure, it's slightly less fun to not always be zooming around, but it's also a lot easier to actually control. But even that doesn't make Great Bay easier to go through. It still sucks! Like, this is the worst part of the game, in both versions. Why did they think this was a good idea?
Well, that one major flaw aside, I think the dungeons in this game are pretty smartly designed. The Woodfall Temple manages to use Deku Link's abilities to great effect and masters the swampy aesthetic beautifully. Snowhead Temple is one of the best vertical dungeons in the series' history and uses Goron Link's rolling masterfully. And Stone Tower Temple is a candidate for most memorable Zelda dungeon ever. This is all definitely a case of quality over quantity. Except Great Bay Temple.
Okay, I'll stop bitching about Great Bay.
However, the key appeal of Majora's Mask isn't in the main dungeons. Obviously, there are 4. No, that appeal comes in the game's side quests. You see, true to the name, Majora's Mask places a lot of emphasis on the masks Link can wear while traveling around Termina, with there being a grand total of 24 masks to get. 3 of these are transformation masks you need to get and use for the story. 1 is given to you near the end of the Stone Tower Temple if you know what you're doing, and 1 is reward for collecting every other mask in the game. However, the other 19 masks are earned by helping the people of Termina, usually in the form of side quests.
Yeah, these are good.
I honestly don't know what I can say about the mask quests that hasn't been said like 100 times before. The quest for the bunny hood is basically setting a guy up so he can die. The Song of the Windfish sounds nothing like the song from Link's Awakening. The Great Fairies have weird colored hair.
I guess the biggest problem with this project is I have a lot of things I could theoretically talk about with each of these games, but like, why would I? If someone's going to watch this full video, they probably aren't complete strangers to the Zelda series. Anyone who's made it past the intro probably already knows more about games like Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask than I ever have. So, there's really not that much to talk about. So how about the 3DS remake?
Oh, actual camera control, my beloved. Pretty much all of the quality of life improvements from Ocarina of Time 3D were preserved, and a few more were added on top. For example, for players with a Circle Pad Pro or a new 3DS, there was brand new right stick camera control, and I'm going to say this right now, all 3D Zelda games need full camera control. I get why it wasn't a part of the N64 games to begin with, I mean, look at this controller, but it is an absolute godsend. Unfortunately, it's only in this game, both versions of Wind Waker, 2 versions of Twilight Princess, and Breath of the Wild.
Love the revolutionary new controls for Skyward Sword in handheld mode, Nintendo. Really appreciate it.
There was also a more detailed in-game clock. Certain quest items were now relegated to the gear screen. You could save owl statues permanently, along with these new quill statues. You could look down while flying as Deku Link. There's only 1 guidance stone, and it's tucked away inside the clock tower where it belongs.
They even upgraded the Bomber's Notebook to keep actual track of side quests, which was super useful. Admittedly, there were some downsides to the expanded functionality, but I don't think it was very noticeable. Okay, that was a joke, but for real, the Bomber's Notebook being upgraded is genuinely a good idea. They even made maps more useful too, so you can actually see things in more detail. So, what's so controversial about this remake? Oh no. Oh no. Wait, actually I think this version of Yorg is more fun to fight. Like, it's the one actual improvement to Great Bay they made.
Yeah, not all the changes were necessarily great ideas. Don't get me wrong, I get what they were going for with these bosses, and again, I think Yorg is actually an improvement over the original. However, the new design for Goat made the whole thing a lot more clunky, and the altered twin mold fight just feels slow to me. Even Odalwa feels like it's backwards since it de-emphasizes the item from the dungeon, the bow and arrow, over just using the Deku mask. There are other iffy decisions too, like the stone mask being gotten from a guard just sitting in the pirate's stronghold, meaning getting it isn't a cool creative way of getting past the obstacles, it's just another stop in the mini-dungeon. Or how about Goron Link now continuing to roll permanently once he gets up to speed, and I swear being even harder to steer. And again, I do like the redesigned Zora's Mask fine, but it is still questionable to take the main mechanic a lot of players originally love and make it a magic-consuming special move. Like, imagine if the spin attack from Link to the Past suddenly became a magic-using move. Oh wait, they actually did that with Ocarina of Time's first magic upgrade. Never mind!
There are also some changes that were intended to be quality of life improvements that ended up being controversial. For example, in the original game, the Song of Double Time would send Link to the next 6 o'clock, either AM or PM, based on what time it was in-game. In the remake, however, the song now allows the player to move to any whole hour within the current day, all the way up to the next 6 AM. This was clearly meant to be more convenient for players who want to play the game in their own time, but some argued it missed the original point of the mechanic and how Majora's Mask is supposed to work.
Also, they added fishing holes into the game. I can't tell you anything else. I didn't play the fishing minigame in this game or Ocarina of Time.
Ultimately, I think the decision of which version of Majora's Mask is better comes down to personal taste and opinion. What do you value in the game? What improvements do you want, and how much are they worth to you? What problems are you willing to overlook or even consider problems at all? What do you want in Majora's Mask?
Personally, I'm not giving up camera controls. You can rip that from my cold dead hand.
So, yeah, Majora's Mask was a good game overall. However, it didn't do enough to address the single biggest problem fans had with Ocarina of Time.
So does this come before or after Wand of Gamelon?
So, for those of you who have actual occupations and don't spend all your time obsessing over a video game franchise for kids, here's a brief rundown of the assumed timeline of the Zelda games at this point in the series. Zelda 1 and 2 are fairly traditional in their order, with Zelda 2 being an almost direct sequel to 1, despite the change in everything. However, the manuals for these games were the only places where you could get an actual story, with the manual for Zelda 2 giving us the lore of the Triforce of Courage and the first Princess Zelda. Basically, some ancient ruler of Hyrule locked the Triforce of Courage away in a secret place ages ago, separated from the rest of the Triforce only for a great hero of later generations to claim. Then, years later, a prince was supposed to become the next king of Hyrule after his dad died, but apparently only his sister Zelda knew where the Triforce of Courage was, so he and a wizard tried to get the information out of her, but that didn't work, so the wizard cast a spell on her that would make her sleep forever.
Bit harsh.
Then, the prince sealed her away in a secret crypt and ruled that every girl born into the royal family from that point on would be named Zelda, making this Zelda the very first Princess Zelda.
And then Link to the Past was a prequel, and absolutely none of that made sense anymore.
So, in A Link to the Past, we have a Princess Zelda, and the ending shows the full Triforce together, and there is no prince in sight. To be fair, the king comes back to life at the end of the game, so maybe he has another kid for some reason. However, even with the inconsistency, it isn't that big of a deal. Like in the first 2 Zelda games, the only in-game story you got was a text scroll that felt more like an Easter egg. I don't think most players were that upset about the lore being broken. Hell, even the fact that this game was a prequel to the originals is kind of ambiguous, so who really cares if it messes with the canon a bit in the process?
Put your hands down, I know you're lying.
However, A Link to the Past had a lot more story, with the introduction of the Master Sword, the 7 maidens who are descended from the 7 wise men, the idea that Ganon used to be a human named Ganondorf Dragmire who was the king of thieves.
Question, why is Ganondorf one of like 5 characters in the whole Zelda franchise with the last name? And why is his alias in the manual Mandrag Ganon?
The opening of the game and the manual go into detail about how Ganondorf claimed the Triforce, how the gang of thieves opened the way to the Golden Land of the Triforce, how Ganondorf killed his followers in this gang and claimed the full Triforce, how the people of Hyrule forged a sword that was resistant to magic that didn't actually do anything because apparently nobody claimed it, and the Knights of Hyrule eventually just ended up holding Ganon back so the 7 wise men could magically seal Ganon in the Golden Land.
For the record, pretty much all of that was exclusively in the English manual, so who knows how canon it really is. I mean, it also says the gods descended from a distant nebula, and that the bearers of the Triforce would be titled stuff like the Juror of Courage, so maybe not the most accurate.
In-game, all we know is that there were 7 wise men who the king commanded to seal the Golden Land to stop people sealing the Triforce, and apparently Ganon can only be defeated by the Master Sword. Okay, cool, that works as a backstory for the game.
And then Ocarina of Time was a prequel, and absolutely none of that made sense anymore.
Okay, so the 3 biggest problems with the in-game story of Link to the Past now. Number 1, there is no mention of Link, aka the hero of time. You'd think for a historical event this important to the story, the most important figure to help seal Ganon away would have at least gotten a mention. Number 2, the 7 wise men are the 7 sages, who aren't all men. There's like 2 men in the whole group, and one of them is made of rocks.
Racially ambiguous rocks at that.
Seriously, there are only 2 men in the group and only 2 Hylians, though admittedly Nibiru and Impa could probably have Hylian-looking kids, but you mean to tell me the Eternal Child had descendants?
Maybe that dating sim would have been more controversial than I thought.
Number 3, Ganondorf doesn't have the full Triforce. At no point in Ocarina of Time does Ganondorf claim the Triforce of Wisdom or the Triforce of Courage. I guess that kind of lines up with the original Zelda one, since in that Ganondorf only ever has the Triforce of Power, but that story also involves Ganon having an army that raided the Little Kingdom of Hyrule, and also that game's story was an Easter egg. Ganondorf is sealed in the Sacred Realm at the end of Ocarina, which I believe is supposed to be the Golden Land from A Link to the Past, but he only has one piece of the Triforce, and then Link goes back in time and maybe prevents literally any of the game from ever happening.
Because fuck continuity, that's why.
So, how do you reconcile all these changes and differences? Well, you don't. But if you have to, you could theoretically come up with theories about how the ending of Ocarina of Time... Oh dear lord, what have we done? Yes, in order to explain the various inconsistencies in the Zelda timeline, which would only get worse with every new game released, fans came up with timeline theories trying to explain how exactly any of this was possible. Some went simple, saying there was only one timeline, either just continuing on from where Zelda sent Link to, or assuming a stable time loop where Link going back in time still led to the exact same events playing out, just with an extra Link kicking around. Others assumed that Zelda sending Link back in time split the timeline in two, with one continuing on from Ganon's sealing, and the other changing drastically after Link returned from his journey. These came to be known as the child and adult timelines, and they are both now canon.
So, which one leads to A Link to the Past?
Neither.
That doesn't make any sense.
You don't make any sense.
I know.
Eventually, with the release of Skyward Sword, Nintendo released their own official timeline for the Zelda series, and they went for the crazy option. 3 branches of the timeline, all off of Ocarina of Time. 2 were the ones we already talked about, but the third, which contained the first 4 games in the series, hinged on Link being defeated by Ganondorf near the end of Ocarina of Time. How the hell that warrants its own split in the timeline is beyond anyone. Oh no, I got a game over in A Link Between Worlds, better make a game exploring that reality. Regardless, it does kind of explain some of the inconsistencies, if not all of them. We still have no idea how 5 women and a rock dude suddenly all became Rauru, but it at least explains why the Hero of Time wasn't mentioned or why Ganondorf now had the full Triforce.
It also kind of maybe explains what happened to the other species in Ocarina that apparently went missing by Link to the Past. Like, I always assumed the absence of any Gorons or Kokiri in Hyrule from this point forward, and the radically different Zoras probably meant, Ganon went full genocide on them. Don't act like he wouldn't do it. This is a guy who blasted a random kid with dark magic.
So, this is the canon timeline, sort of. Look, I don't doubt that some of the Zelda games were made with this timeline in mind. I mean, let's be real, A Link Between Worlds only really makes sense once you consider this exists, but I don't think this was always some secret guiding light for the Zelda series since the beginning. I think it's more likely that Nintendo just didn't care all that much about making a canon timeline, and when fans started making their own, they decided, oh cool, now we can justify doing weird shit with our stories.
Ultimately, now that Ocarina of Time existed and so many people had played it, pretty much every game made in the series for the next decade would take place in one of the timelines where, actually matters. I mean, this was one of the best received games ever made. You think they were just gonna act like it never happened? However, before that happened, before the story of Ganondorf the Gerudo would continue, Nintendo did the unthinkable. They trusted another studio to make their games.
Yes, between May of 2001 and December of 2002, at least in America, Capcom released 3 different Legend of Zelda games, 2 of which were in this new Link Died LOL timeline, and the third being complicated.
I'm kind of surprised Nintendo was willing to do this, given the last time a non-Nintendo company made 2 simultaneous Zelda games and a third barely connected one. Seriously, I'm not saying this is the same as the CDI games, I'm just saying I'd be surprised if Miyamoto didn't have war flashbacks. So, the next 2 games were released on the same day and can technically be played in any order, so I'm gonna have to think about which to play first. Never mind, we have a canon.
I have now officially beaten Legend of Zelda Oracle of Seasons. It was fine. I have to move on to Oracle of Ages. I'll give more in-depth thoughts when I'm finished with that.
Oracle of Seasons, a game that was almost a Zelda 1 remake for the Game Boy Color. This game is good, but it's not exactly great. Just kind of decent,
Our story begins with Link arriving somewhere. Honestly, not sure where. The Triforce is inside, and official sources say this is Hyrule Castle, but it doesn't really make sense in the timeline for the Triforce to be here. or in the light world at all for that matter.
And don't give me that revisionist, oh, well, the Oracle games don't take place right after Link to the Past. The game all but confirms that it is the prequel to Link's Awakening, and that Link has to be the same Link from A Link to the Past, otherwise, why would its nightmare include Aghanim and Ganon? Hyrule's story got it right, and I'm not going to listen to any recons that the Majora's Mask with Skull Kid's Dream people gave us. You ever wish this franchise was simple?
So Link approaches the Triforce, and for some reason it sends him on an epic quest to the land of Holodrum, where an evil dude named Onyx then kidnaps a girl named Din, who is also the Oracle of Seasons. Don't question it, I know the naming thing is weird, but you're just going to have to accept it. There are 3 random girls now who all are somehow powerful, and they're all named after Hyrule's creation goddesses. Anyways, Din's been kidnapped, which throws the season into chaos, and now Link has to save her.
If I had to give a couple season exclusive critiques, the first would have to be that season story is pretty weak. There are a couple subplots, like the skeleton pirates, mostly in Saprosia, and the trading quest to get an upgraded sword. Overall, though, the game is a lot less focused on the story as opposed to just exploration. And you know, I understand that choice. I think it could work for a lot of people. Personally, though, I prefer to have my Zelda games with a bit more story, you know?
Overall, the biggest problem with the Oracle games is just the platform they were released for. I know, it's unfair to judge the games just because they were released for the Game Boy Color, and to be fair, they use the controls of the system a lot better than Link's Awakening. Hell, they even do some creative stuff with the system, like in a Link game you can get Bigoron's sword, similar to Ocarina of Time, but to make it work with the 2D, 2 items mechanics, the Bigoron's sword takes up both item buttons, as opposed to just not letting you use the shield. That's genuinely a clever idea. The problem is, for every other item, you constantly have to swap around and rearrange how you're organizing your items.
Also, this might just be a personal pet peeve, but I hate that the items don't have fixed positions in the inventory. Like, I'm sure there's some mechanical or technological reason for it, but it annoys me so much because with how you have to swap items constantly, it's almost impossible to keep track of where an item is. Again, though, that might just be a personal problem.
So, gameplay-wise, there are a few different unique features to the Oracle games. For Oracle of Seasons in particular, the Spirits of Nature give Link the Rod of Seasons, which you can use to switch between the 4 different seasons. At least once you unlock those seasons. Plus, you can only switch seasons on top of tree stumps, and you can't choose which season you switch to directly, you have to cycle through them in order.
And before you comment, yes, I know that's how seasons work in real life. But it's not like these games have ever made an effort to be realistic.
You also have the animal buddies in this game, friendly companions who can help Link get past certain obstacles in the overworld, including pits, cliffs, and water. These are cool for sure, and all 3 are completely different. The only problem is that you can't use all 3 for the full game. You have one dedicated section with each one where they're required, but otherwise you have to pick only one to bring with you. And selecting what you want is so obtuse you basically need a guide to do it, and even then, if you play seasons first, you don't get to try them out before getting locked into one. So basically, there are 3 flutes you can collect, but you can only grab one of them for the game, with your choice being reflected in a linked game. More on that later. To get one flute, you just don't pick up either of the other flutes, and that flute will be given to you automatically. For another, you just need to buy it in a shop. For the third, you have to play a random minigame, which does not tell you it will give you a flute, or really any reward past the first one in Seasons. Depending on which of these flutes you get, you either have Ricky the Kangaroo, who bounces around and punches, can jump over short gaps, and can scale cliffs, Moosh the Flying Bear, who can fly over gaps and ground pound enemies, or Dimitri the Dodongo, who can swim through any water, swim up waterfalls, can also go on land, can be picked up by Link with power bracelets, and can eat enemies, killing them in one go.
So of course, his flute is locked behind a mini-game that gives out its rewards at random.
The next unique feature of the Oracle games is the ring system, where you can find various rings throughout the world. When you get them appraised at a specific shop, you then add them to your list, which you can then look through to choose from 1 to 5 rings to put in your box, which you can then manually select in the options menu so you can wear one at a time. And what do these do? Everything and also nothing. Yeah, I really didn't engage with the ring system all that much. Don't get me wrong, I love the idea, having different rings that have different effects and choosing which you use to get an advantage in certain sections. The problem is most of the rings are either intentionally useless, relatively useless, are completely situational, or have downsides that make them less viable. Yes, some of them are very cool and very useful, but just not enough to be worth engaging with this clunky system. It doesn't help that most of the most useful rings are given completely randomly, usually through the random Gasha trees.
Yep, they named the main way of getting rings after a gambling game. It's like they knew.
Also, while I'm complaining, while I don't think any of the areas or dungeons in Oracle of Seasons are necessarily bad, they're a lot less memorable than in other games, with only the 8th dungeon really standing out personally. It doesn't help that Seasons intentionally emphasized combat over puzzles, so while there are still some puzzles, they mostly take a backseat to rooms full of enemies, and the puzzles themselves aren't anything to write home about.
Let me be clear here, because I'm doing a lot of complaining and I don't like always being so negative. Oracle of Seasons is still a good game. It's a well-made Zelda game, and I don't hate it in any way. While there are a lot of things to criticize, I still think this is a game worth playing if you're a longtime Zelda fan. I just don't think it's one of the best games ever made. Especially when they released a better version of it at the same time.
So, now on to Oracle of Ages, and I'll talk to you later. I have now finished Oracle of Ages. Yeah, that was pretty fun.
The final unique mechanic of the Oracle games is the linking system, which works very interestingly. Once you finish one game, in my case Oracle of Seasons, you get a special code for the other game, which you can put in when starting a new file. This not only continues the overarching story of the two games, but also allows you to bring over rings, start with an extra heart container, and learn link secrets to bring into the post-game of the first game to earn special rewards across both games. And this is very fun, but it's not the main appeal of Ages to me.
I think I like Oracle of Ages a little bit better than I like Oracle of Seasons. And that's leaving out, stuff like the linking secrets and like the expanded ending, because obviously it'd be a bit unfair to like give that point to Ages when obviously it could have gone to either one of them. It's just the order that I played them in because, canon. I liked it. I think the only thing that's really holding the Oracle games back is just like the system they were made for, honestly. I think part of why I like Oracle of Ages better is, one, I like the puzzle focus more than the combat focus. Oracle of Ages is a lot more focused on the puzzles, and they feel a lot better to play. I also think the story is a lot more expansive than Oracle of Seasons. Seasons, it's like, the story is there, like there is an appreciable story, but it's just, I don't know. I did enjoy the link stuff. I think the linking secrets are very interesting. A bit cumbersome, especially if you only have one system and you have to swap out the games and switch saves and all that junk. Otherwise, it's a good pair of games. I think the ending is a little interesting, and you can definitely tell there were meant to be 3 different games. So, I had fun. They were good games.
Okay, we went over most of the gameplay stuff already, so let's stick to what makes Oracle of Ages unique and some of the linking stuff.
Our story begins with Link once again falling into a different country, this time the land of Labrina, where he encounters, "Oh hey Impa, how's it going? Weird you don't recognize me since this is a Link game, but then you are also looking rather blue-tinted today." So yeah, she tricks Link into opening the way to the titular Oracle of Ages, Nehru, and then the obvious entity possessing her, Varen, exits her body and takes over Nehru instead. Then they go back thousands of years into the past, and suddenly people start either vanishing, transforming, or turning to stone.
Gotta say, Varen's plan is a lot more threatening than Mox's. Like, yeah, realistically, throwing the seasons out of whack would probably lead to a major catastrophe, but that's only because of the nuances of Earth's ecosystem. Meanwhile, Varen is straight up altering time to murder people before they were even born. We went from bootleg Captain Planet to straight up Terminator. That's jumping stakes.
As a matter of fact, Oracle of Ages has a lot more story than Oracle of Seasons in general. Subplots with more emphasis on plot, more recurring characters and recurring locations, even justifications for why certain dungeons exist. Obviously, like with Seasons' relatively lighter story, this more comes down to opinion than it does objectivity. Like I said before, I like a greater emphasis on stories, so yeah, I prefer this difference.
I also prefer the greater emphasis on puzzles that this game has, so big win there. I don't dislike 2D Zelda combat, especially when it's well done. I think it can be very fun and challenging. But I also think the 2D Zelda games can be a bit too simple with combat, especially combat based entirely around swordplay. Keep that in mind when we talk about other games later.
That greater emphasis on puzzles, by the way, is apparent pretty much throughout the game. Most of the bosses are puzzle bosses who can't just be beat through button mashing. Early puzzles are much more involved than Seasons, and there are tons of new mechanics and items exclusive to this version of the Oracle games that emphasize puzzle solving and creative thinking.
Like, when I was taking notes while playing Oracle of Seasons, I wrote down a note about the slingshot in the game. The seed system in the games is genuinely cool. It mixes things like the spells from Ocarina of Time with the Deku seeds, Deku nuts, and arrows. And that is genuinely a cool thing in Oracle of Seasons. But then I played Oracle of Ages, where instead of a slingshot, we get the seed shooter, which fires slightly faster and has bouncing shots. Like, it's the same item, but better used for puzzle solving and creative level design. You see why my late loving ass preferred Ages over Seasons.
There are other changes, of course. The season swapping mechanic is exchanged with a time-traveling system, where certain spots in an instrument let Link travel back thousands of years to the time Varen traveled to. Instead of an upgraded boomerang and rock cape, we get an upgraded power bracelet and flippers. Quick note, the mermaid suit is worse to control than the flippers, and everyone knows it, but anyways. Ages has more mini-dungeons, but a slightly less interconnected overworld. Honestly, if I wanted to, the list could go on for the majority of this video.
But I'm not writing a Wikipedia article about the differences between two games. I'm only bringing it up to emphasize that these are two very different, very separate games. Which is why it's so odd that they're also the same extremely long game.
Yes, if you have both Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons, you can connect one save game to the other and get an expanded experience. Specifically an expanded experience of the second game, since outside of maybe one or two optional sections, all you get for the first is a post-game where you can mess around with some new toys. In the second game, however, not only do you get all those toys before the 7th dungeon, but you get an expanded story, including Zelda. Yeah, without a Link game, the story just ends with Ganon's moms being ominous and, I guess, orchestrating the whole plot. With a Link game, we get Ganon's resurrection, which was supposed to involve the sacrifice of Princess Zelda, but instead just happens when Twin Rova dies. Again.
I don't like talking about endings that much since, I'd rather avoid getting accused of spoilers despite, disclaimer. So I won't go into too much detail, but yes, the Link ending to the Oracle games is pretty satisfying. Also, again, this duology leads directly to Link's Awakening. Don't try to argue with me. I don't care if Zelda didn't recognize Link. This is the only logical view of the timeline. So, yeah, for their first time creating a Zelda game, I think Capcom knocked it out of the park. Can't say that as much about the next one.
So, probably get on Four Swords, and I'll talk to you when I finish that. Peace. I have played all I plan to play of Four Swords Anniversary Edition. That wasn't very fun.
Four Swords was originally released in the United States as a side mode to A Link to the Past for GBA on December 2nd, 2002. This actually means it predates Wind Waker, the next main game, which released in Japan 9 days later. So even though in Japan this game released after Wind Waker, for our purposes, this is the next game on the list. Shame it's not very good.
Four Swords isn't really a Zelda game. I know that's probably gonna be controversial, but it's not fun. I can see the fun. I can see what they were going for, but my god, it doesn't work. It really doesn't work. That has to be my least favorite game so far. The Anniversary Edition is better because you can play in single player, but it's worse because it's not built to be played in single player. It's not fun for me. Interestingly, I would say the best and worst parts of the game are the parts that were added in specifically for the Anniversary Edition. The Realm of Memories, great concept, great idea, playing through retro games like that, playing through the old Zelda games with this new kind of weird style, I can get behind that. I think they could have gone farther with that. The worst part of the game is the Hero's Trial, which is just complete unfair bullshit, like constant enemy spam, and I'm sure a lot of people like it, and it's not terrible all of the time. It's just not great. Hopefully I like Four Swords Adventure a little bit more,
Spoilers, I did not.
The unfortunate thing is that I don't have that much to actually say about Four Swords. It's a side mode for a re-release that itself got re-released for like a month and then 3 days, and it isn't built like I prefer a Zelda game to be built, so I don't like it that much. Don't get me wrong, if you like it, I can fully understand that, and I think there are some very good parts about it. I just don't think it's my kind of game. Sorry.
But with that, we've officially made it to the halfway point. If not of the video, then definitely the series. We've played 9 different games, including 2 full remakes, and we have 9 games left to go, including the remaining 4 3D titles. We have the series' emotional whiplash, the establishment of an actual timeline, and the 2D slump and renaissance all ahead of us. With that in mind, I want to take a break, one that might not be completely on topic, because our next game is on a certain console. Yep, we're doing this. Wasting our time.
Ah, the Wii U. God's gift to Nintendo haters. I've taken a look at this system before, and I've made a couple jokes at its expense. It's kinda hard not to, given its reputation.
I think it's dead.
The Wii U was the worst-selling Nintendo home console ever, selling 13.5 million units worldwide before being discontinued, which may not sound that bad until you realize the second worst on that list sold over 21 million, and its worst competition sold over 50 million. And that was the Xbox One. To be fair, being sandwiched between the Wii and the Switch probably means it was always going to be seen as a disappointment, but man, it did not do itself any favors. What is this?
Have a laptop?
The Wii U gamepad, an interesting idea for a controller to be sure, bringing the dual-screen, touchscreen gameplay of the DS line to a home console, it's a cool idea. One problem, it didn't work.
Okay, let's be fair. It does actually work. The gamepad connects to the console, the screen is decent quality and responsive, and in some cases it makes a lot of sense. Like sure, you could just play Super Mario Maker entirely on the gamepad, but using that for the building and the TV for playing levels is a lot more fun. The problem isn't that the gamepad had no purpose. The problem is that it was the whole console.
The Wii U had 2 innovations as a console, HD graphics and the gamepad, which came bundled with every single Wii U system. This wasn't an optional controller like the U-Draw, this was the system's main controller, the equivalent to the Wiimote for the Wii. Hell, you can't even start the console up without the gamepad. So, how important was the gamepad for most games? Well, in Mario Kart 8, you can use it to honk.
Finally.
Yeah, for the vast majority of games, the gamepad was just not necessary. See, here's the thing. The Wii U tried to balance the line Nintendo created between the casual gamers and more hardcore fans, trying to pull back some from their overly safe, overly casual attitude during the previous generation. The problem is, gimmicks like the gamepad didn't really make most hardcore games better as much as they did make them gimmicky. Zombie U was framed as the system's debut hardcore title, and it used the gamepad as a backpack that could be used at any time, which is an interesting idea in general, but doesn't make much sense in, say, high-pressure survival games with monsters trying to kill you. What about all the ports made for the system? Well, the majority just straight up didn't use it. A lot of games just mirrored the image from the TV onto the gamepad, or if you were lucky, doubled some HUD elements onto it. But why?
Well, the fact that my TV is currently broken might be a hint.
Yep, one of the other gimmicks of the gamepad was that it turned the system into a semi-handheld system. If one of your family members wants to use the TV, you can just put the console into handheld mode and walk at most one room away because the signal can't really go between walls that well. Yes, this is an idea they tried again with the Nintendo Switch and to much greater success, but why? Well, for one thing, the Switch doesn't have a dual screen mode.
I knew something was missing!
For both the Switch and the Wii U, developers have to build most games to work on a single handheld screen. However, for the Wii U, they also had to build them to work on both a TV and a handheld screen, while also making it possible to switch between the 2 modes at a moment's notice. To which most developers responded,
I think we're just gonna stick with Xbox and PlayStation.
In total, a little less than 800 games released for the Wii U, which is more than the N64 to be fair, and even more than the GameCube. Still, that's less than half the Wii's library, and trust me, it's not for lack of shovelware. Combine that with such thrilling first-party releases as New Super Mario Bros. U,
It's okay.
Game & Wario,
It's okay.
and Mario Party,
Why do I own this and not 6?
it's fair to say audiences weren't exactly wowed by the Wii U. Didn't help that the marketing was like,
Hey kids, did you know you could play Mario on a Wii U? Just get your parents to buy you a Wii U this Christmas! Don't ask why we're saying stuff like this 4 years after it launched! We need money!
So yeah, it's safe to say the Wii U didn't exactly light the world on fire. To be fair, I don't think it's a completely terrible system, and it does have some quality titles. And it just so happens that 2 of those titles are major Zelda titles. Remade.
I bought a Wii U in 2022. I think I'm the first human to do that in like half a decade. I stand by my statement. So, we've got 2 full 3D games in the series released. One was a revolutionary title that redefined action and adventure games forever, and the other was a genuinely ingenious and creative sequel. We got a few handheld releases in between made by third parties. What about the next big core entry in the series? How about a game everyone used to hate despite it being the best game in the series so far?
I have just completed The Legend of Zelda Wind Waker. HD, to be specific. That was a lot of fun.
The first entry in the series made for the GameCube, and the first to receive an HD remake, because the 3DS could only do like 240p. Up to this point in the project, I wasn't exactly not having fun, but it's fair to say I wasn't exactly enthralled either. So maybe that's why I enjoyed Wind Waker so damn much.
I was very worried after, Ocarina of Time and even a little bit Majora's Mask that, like, the 3D Zelda games were just going to be a slog to get through. No, that was so much fun. That is definitely up there for my favorite Zelda games so far, at least. It's a very fun game to just sort of play. And I know that's like, obviously that's the point, but it's like, it's very fun seeing what you can do at any given point, Part of this might just be because of the HD version, which, adds in the Swift Sale and, changes some orders of things, but there's never a moment where you get bored. There's always something to do. There's always something to see or explore or, like, try to do. All the caverns that you can find which have challenges in them. Each island has something to do, Like, even if it's a little thing, it's like, there's still something there. It's a very fun game to just, sit down and play. It was just a lot of fun, God, I am repeating myself so badly.
It really past me, I hadn't noticed.
Wind Waker begins with Link asleep because it worked so well in Link to the Past, and Link's Awakening, and Ocarina of Time, and whichever Oracle game you play first. Suddenly, sister. It's your birthday, so your grandma gives you clothes, your sister gives you a telescope, and the giant bird flying over your island gives you a call to adventure.
I think I prefer the socks.
So he drops a girl into a forest on top of a mountain on top of the island, which is technically 2 islands.
I promise this is all relevant to my review.
Which inspires Link to borrow a sword from the island's resident shirtless man and save her. Then the big bird steals his sister. Well, looks like there's nothing to be done but go on an epic adventure across the ocean to try and fail to save your sister, collect 3 pearls, get a fancy sword, succeed at saving your sister, try and fail to kill the big bad, restore your fancy sword to super fancy, collect 8 pieces of Triforce, and succeed at killing the big bad because apparently the pirates didn't have any more cannonballs they could launch.
And to think, all this could have been avoided if your sister had just not moved.
I actually really like the game's story. It doesn't take itself deadly seriously, of course, but it does still have real stakes and genuine emotion. Honestly, if you can get through the grandma side quest without a single tear, I'm convinced you're a robot. Then the ending manages to give a great, super satisfying conclusion to the arc that started in Ocarina of Time.
Or at least one super satisfying conclusion. I actually understand the Zelda timeline, and even I don't understand it.
As for the gameplay, we've come a long way from Ocarina of Time. For one, we can't go underwater or swim for more than 10 seconds.
Because apparently chibis can't hold their breath?
Yeah, ironically, the Zelda games where the whole world is flooded are the games with the least interactive water. You can't even swim at all in the sequels. Still, aside from that, the game feels so much better to control.
Or not aside from it if you hate water levels.
First off, hello decent camera controls, my precious. In Wind Waker HD, you can move the camera wherever you want with the right stick, and even in the original, you still have full left and right control, plus some zoom.
From what I remember, you can't do complete camera control because up on the C-stick was first person. Oh, yeah, I used to have Wind Waker on the GameCube, but then my brother moved away from home and took it with him. He also took the GameCube version of Twilight Princess, the Ocarina of Time bonus disc, and my original copy of Ocarina of Time 3D. Matt, give me back Ocarina 3D, which I bought, and I'll give you back the Metroid Prime trilogy on Wii.
Meanwhile, you use the B button for your sword, the right trigger for your shield, crouch and grab, and the X button, Y button, and either the right bumper or the Z button as your item buttons, which I believe makes this the third Zelda game where you can use more than one, maybe two items.
There are also a number of control differences between the original and the HD version. For instance, in the original you would use the D-pad to pull up the map. In the HD version, it's just part of the pause menu, not to mention being on the gamepad when possible. The original also had the right and left D-pad to mess with the mini-map, which wasn't included in the HD version at all. That's kind of dumb. Like, don't get me wrong, I think using the map on the gamepad works really well with this game, like it does with the 3DS games. But not having even the option for a mini-map, that's kind of dumb.
As for other HD changes, we have the Tingle Tuner from the original switched with the Tingle Bottles, which lets you communicate using the Meteor service. Or rather, they did let you do that until the service was shut down. It's kind of unfortunate since the original Tingle Tuner could probably have been mixed in with the Wii U gamepad. I mean, Nintendo already treated this thing like an overgrown Game Boy Advance. It's whatever, the original Tingle Tuner wasn't all that useful anyway. There are also some minor control improvements, like being able to use the Wind Waker at any moment without having to equip it, and the same being true for the crane and cannon on the boat. However, the big showstopper, and the one everyone remembers, is the Swift Sail, an optional sail upgrade which makes you move significantly faster through open sea, and it means you don't have to manually change the wind if you want to turn. If you don't like it, fine, you're just probably the kind of person who thinks Pathologic Classic is the most fun game ever.
There are other improvements too, like the starting wallet being slightly bigger, which I definitely approve of. Plus, where originally all 8 Triforce pieces required treasure charts that you had to decode, now 5 of those charts are replaced by the piece itself, meaning you get a more direct reward from those chests. And you have to spend less on Tingle. Less money, less time, which I appreciate since it means less of a chance for Link to end up like David Jr.
Overall, if there's one thing that defines Wind Waker in my mind, it's exploration. Sailing around the world, going to each individual island, and discovering what's in each section of the Great Sea, it's so much fun. The only real lame part is that before you complete the Forbidden Forest, you really don't get to explore the world as freely as you want. You can go between Windfall and Dragon Roost, or between Dragon Roost and the Forest Haven, but that's it! You can't even go between Windfall and Forest Haven. The King of Red Lions literally stops you from taking the diagonal. How dare you! You are my boat, I am your captain, I don't care if you have the ghost of literal king inside you, do my bidding!
After that, though, you can explore freely.
There's a level of freedom in Wind Waker that just doesn't exist in most of the other 3D entries. Sure, you're locked out of some of the interiors until you get specific items, but you can still at least go to each island from very early in the game. There are no impassable bridges blocked by Gerudo, or walls you need a horse to jump over, or massive sections of Twilight to destroy. Once you complete the 3rd dungeon,
because yes, the first trip to the Forsaken Fortress counts as a dungeon.
The world is your oyster. Hell, you can technically get multiple Triforce shards before you even earn the Master Sword. Combine this with the side quests spread all across the Great Sea, the mini-games you can find on random islands, and the quest to get pictures of all the NPCs to make figurines of them, and there is so much to do and see all across the world map.
Now, the dungeons of Wind Waker have been criticized at times due to being pretty linear. Now, in terms of layout, they're actually fairly interconnected, but you do explore them linearly. But like, every Zelda dungeon since Zelda 2 has been like that. You pretty much always have one way you're supposed to go, and most of the time the option to deviate ends up more annoying than anything.
To me, what makes this game's dungeons stand out are their unique ideas and designs. The first run through this Forsaken Fortress is a surprisingly deep stealth sequence. The Forbidden Forest is one of the most unique ideas for a forest temple ever. The Tower of God serves as an excellent test of puzzle solving skills. The Sage Temples are arguably the most fun escort missions I've ever played. I wouldn't say the game has the best dungeons of any Zelda game, but these are all incredibly cool.
If I had to complain about anything, I'd say that as much as there is to do, there's still a lot of space that's mostly empty. Like, even with the Swift Sail, there's a lot of the time where you're just sailing to a destination. And 2, I wish there was a better map for individual islands. Like, the map for the dungeons is detailed enough, and there is sort of a top-down map of each island. But for a location like Dragon Roost, where everything is inside the mountain, there's not a good way of seeing where everything is. Even Windfall is so dense and detailed that it's easy to get lost and straight up forget where certain things are. But those are definitely problems you can get used to, and overall, I think they work with the game's exploration focus. Overall, I think this is just an amazing video game. Wish I could say that for all of them.
8 overall games to go. The next being this, Four Swords Adventures, which I'm going to be playing single player. I have just beaten Four Swords Adventure. This game did not make a good first impression. However, that did not change.
So, after Four Swords disappointed me and Wind Waker was so amazing, I was kind of prepared for anything with this game. Unfortunately, the one thing I wasn't prepared for is what I got. Because what I got was dog shit. Take it away, past me.
Did not like this one. Did not enjoy my time with this game at all. I decided that for this sort of wrap-up, check-in sort of thing, I decided I'm gonna do future me a favor. Because this game uses so much content from other games, I'm just gonna lazily rehash the notes I took while playing.
No, I'm not kidding. I just read them out then and there so you could get my raw reaction. Enjoy!
Again, playing single player may be less than ideal, but I'm still gonna try. In reference to Four Swords. The story, compared to Four Swords, is odd straight from the beginning. Stuff like, the Temple of Vati, just being weirdly sealed doubly. Unlike the original, you have 4 links at all times, even if you're going solo. Remember to go in depth with the development history here and how Miyamoto kind of made things confusing as hell. That was back when, very early in the game when I thought, I'll keep writing the script that I'm making for these things, but I'm not going. It's way too long, and I do not, The lack of timer and the force gems counter on the pause screen are both appreciated, making the game a lot more sensible to get through. Again, very early on. The formation system makes the game playable in single player, but some of its requirements are a bit clunky. This game officially makes Tingle an antagonist, so that's fun. The level structure is interesting. It's basically a standard Zelda world, but extremely linear and split into chunks. For each level, there are 3 stages, and there are 8 levels in total, and each stage is basically a part of a world. Sometimes it's a dungeon, sometimes it's just part of the overworld. The whole GBA thing for most interiors is odd and kind of annoying, especially in single player, constantly popping up this SB screen onto the TV because God forbid we lose the gimmick. I think the biggest problem with Four Swords is the item system. Constantly having to rely on what random items the level gives you, having to switch at pedestals or change characters to use different items, it's all way clunkier than it needs to be. The other big issue is the combat. Most enemies just require mashing the attack button with very little strategy. Even other 2D Zelda games, while they could encourage mashing at times, change things up with some enemies. Four Swords and Adventures don't. So all they do to make climactic or difficult battles most of the time is throw in a damage sponge or a ton of enemies, neither being particularly fun. Zelda 2 gives you one challenging enemy with a tricky attack pattern that doesn't leave them open most of the time, who you have to learn so you can get hits in and avoid their attacks. Four Swords Adventures gives you 100 enemies rushing you at once that all die in one hit, then a boss who you just press link up against and mash the B button. At this point, I basically started writing mini essays in my notes. There are some interesting story bits, like the Great Fairy in Hyrule Castle, but even this feels weird. The Great Fairy's halves are represented by the Link to the Past Zora sprite, which we see a recolored version of in the water early. You're in level 1. Even when the first half says they look different than their true form, this still leads the player to think they're, a Zora, not a Great Fairy. Later on, we even see the sprite used for a friendly Zora, which at best implies the fairy was being racist when she said her form was hideous. Then, when you get to the barrier that requires her, they bring in a bunch of enemies, which she then zaps away. It's an interesting display of her power, but it feels weird, especially this late in the stage where you would almost expect the climactic showdown. Instead, they just die and the stage keeps going. Then, in the next main screen, a bunch of the same enemies spawn in from almost the exact same position, and you do have to fight them. It almost feels like the developers wanted to pad the stage out with trips to the left and right of the main path and combined it with the Great Fairy so they could get some plot lines started early. This was back when I thought there would be plot lines. Hyrule Castle very blatantly steals huge parts of its design of style from A Link to the Past. While it's clearly intended as a deliberate homage, at a certain point it just feels lazy, especially since so many of the game's assets are already taken from that original.
This game doesn't know what it wants to be. The first boss fight is against Phantom Ganon from Wind Waker, but we haven't even heard anything about Ganon or Ganondorf at this point, so it feels completely jarring. The assets are clearly based on Link to the Past and the first Four Swords, but there are also many assets based off of Wind Waker, including the Great Fairy and Phantom Ganon. The levels are built to resemble standard Zelda design more so than Four Swords single room based layouts, but they're still broken into levels and stages which you can't bring anything between, and going into any building, cave, or pool switches to the GBA display style. Four Swords was different in a lot of ways I didn't like, but it was trying to be different, going for something completely different as a side mode to a full game. Adventures tries to mix both the original Four Swords format and design with a traditional 2D Zelda game, and as a result, fails at both. You can't just pop the game in and play with your friends because it's so elaborate and complicated, but it doesn't feel fun to play single player because the design is still built to accommodate all 4 players and there's no tangible sense of progression. The only way I can imagine this being fun to go through is playing through the whole game with a group, preferably in a couple sittings, but that requires at least 2 or more link cables and GBAs, not to mention room to set it all up. The end result is, by the end of the first level, the game already feels like it's going through a massive identity crisis, and it isn't fun to play in that form. Honestly, if it weren't for the core conceit of the project, I would just stop playing and move on to Minish Cap. I've actually played Minish Cap before. It's a lot more fun than this. The controls are clunky. The Y button and L trigger do the exact same thing, the C stick does similar things but slightly faster, and the X button and D-pad of all things do the exact same thing, while the Z button exits out of the GBA screen on the TV, which is pointless if playing with a controller, and the screen itself is redundant if you're playing with actual GBAs. Meanwhile, the A button is both items and interaction, grabbing is done with the R trigger, there's no dedicated shield button, and because there's only one item button, you can only have one item at a time. I assumed the idea was to give players with a GameCube controller a similar experience to playing with a 6-button GBA, but considering how different the experience is already going to inevitably be, why not make it slightly better? There are some interesting levels, like Village of the Blue Maiden, but even there, it just feels like the game wants to be closer to a traditional Zelda game, but can't because of the Four Swords format. This next part is maybe a little bit mean to a person. I'm convinced that the main problem with this game was the director, Toshiaki Suzuki. This was his first time directing a Zelda game, and his previous work for the series was limited to the GBA planning for Wind Waker. Beyond that, he directed a couple Mario remakes and a couple Satellaview games, and he made Kirby's Tilt and Tumble. None of that necessarily qualifies him to direct a project like a full-scale Zelda game, and it really puts into focus why the GBA feels so shoehorned in. Since this game, his most recent directing credits in the US are Face Raiders from 3DS and We Street U, the Google Maps app on Wii U. Beyond that, he's produced the recent ND Cube Mario Party games, basically all of them except 9. I don't know what else I can say, he's my best bet for this game's weak link. The Great Fairies upgrade your items, but only as long as you keep holding that specific item. That's just a general game design complaint. They give you these really cool upgraded versions of each item, but if you place them down on a pedestal, you lose that upgrade. Automatically. The problem with making so much of the game Link to the Past, but again, is that it's setting the game up to compete with that game, but without substantial improvements that keep it from being seen as a shallow imitation. Look at A Link Between Worlds. Yes, a significant portion of that game is taken directly from A Link to the Past, but they still attempt to improve upon that game and do things better. The major gimmick allows for greater non-linearity, which was one of the biggest complaints with the original Link to the Past, while the more advanced hardware of the 3DS allowed for significant advances in how the game is structured and played. While FSA does change things from Link to the Past, it doesn't necessarily improve, instead simply remixing older ideas together, throwing everything it can at the wall and seeing what, if anything, sticks. The result is a game that looks from screenshots like it could be on the N64, that plays like it could be on the GBA, and which lacks any identity of its own beyond the convoluted, incomprehensible mess that is the story. Then I say, fuck it, I'm gonna stop taking notes until like the end of the game, because at this point I figured, okay, this is all from like the first 2 levels, and like it's not fair to judge the whole game on its beginning, you know, what if it gets better? It couldn't make it. The first Lost Woods segment, you just keep going up and you win. Have they ever played a Zelda game before? Don't have to explain myself. You know, I never understood Yahtzee Croshaw complaining about mixing sprite sizes until I played this game. This is about
One of Yahtzee's main complaints in Zero Punctuation is like when games, especially indie retro style games, mix sprite sizes. Like this is one of his main complaints about Undertale in the past. And I generally don't see it, but in this game it's like mixing elements of like Four Swords assets and GBA style assets, and also newer but still pixelated assets, and also assets from Wind Waker. It's a mess. The fact you can't directly control the move, which shoots you forward when there are bottomless pits, lava pits, and general walking hazards, is dumb. I think technically you can control it, but it's very odd. Like, if you're pushing a direction and attacking, then there's a chance you'll do it as part of a combo, which is not great. If an enemy has a shield, it doesn't actually matter where that shield is. You can't hurt them while you can still see the shield. Not entirely sure if that's accurate, but it sure feels accurate while you're playing. The Dodongos return, but they're instantly at the level of the end game in Zelda 1. 3 of them, all attacking you, all requiring the same strategy. At least we don't have limited bombs. Here's a little joke. Every time continue playing comes up, I want so badly to say no, but I want to power through this quickly so I can get to games I actually like. From the start of level 4, of course this game has an escort mission, which starts with randomly firing cannons. Of course she only has 2 hit points. Of course. At least it's only a couple screens. This game consistently fails to communicate crucial mechanics at every opportunity. I know people complain about everything being signposted, but when logs are consistently used in the series as impassable roadblocks, and the game has established things like trees, signs, and other natural things should be burnt, the immediate player reaction to a large log is not, I can probably move that or pick it up. I'm gonna say it, Triforce Heroes is better than either Four Swords game. That's true. This game is built so you can have multiple links with multiple items at a time, but in single player, the whole team can only have one item that they all use. This actually makes it even more limited than Four Swords Anniversary Edition, where both links can have completely different items. World 1 boss, Phantom Ganon. World 5 boss, 4 Phantom Ganons, all attacking at once. Do you see what I mean when I say this game doesn't know how to scale difficult fights? I'm convinced the only reason they made this game come right after Twilight Princess because a plot point involves a dark mirror which an evil race was sealed inside. That's actually true. That's one plot point that is very weird. The one point I will give this game's story over the others, the Gerudo appear and are probably at their most sympathetic and non-problematic. While a more observant and intelligent player could probably find things to object to, they're not stereotyped as thieves, they don't have rules against outsiders or men, and they're generally just presented as a different group of people, no better or worse than Hylians. The only exception is Ganondorf, who is noted in-game to be an outlier who was corrupted by something, either his own ambitions or some nebulous evil. It's not much, but it's there. A shame it's only like one screen. The final stage of level 7, the Tower of Winds, is framed primarily as a 2D level going upwards, with top-down segments being inserts, which is fine in theory and makes sense for a tower. The problem is, because we don't have permanent access to Rock's Feather, the level design can't really take advantage of the change in perspective, like the Black Tower in Oracle of Ages, or the Eagle boss in Link's Awakening. Okay, here's the first long one. This game's story makes no sense. It was supposedly originally written as a prequel to Link to the Past set within the Child timeline, but that doesn't make any sense because the implication of Ocarina of Time is that Link actively stops Ganondorf in that ending, rather than just not opening the way to the Sacred Realm for him. Even accepting the current canon that this is Ganondorf's reincarnation, the story is a jumbled mess, which makes sense considering the developers were told to completely ignore continuity for fear it would make the story too complicated. The problem is, this just made the story even more complicated. And now it doesn't even make sense. Why is a mirror suddenly the key to darkness? Why is the Dark World seemingly just a location in Hyrule, but also a lighter mirror world to various locations? Why does the game put so much emphasis on Ganon's trident, framing it as this all-important, powerful artifact of evil that helped to corrupt Ganondorf, when in previous entries it was only ever stated to be, a trident? What are the maidens? Are they fairies, or sages, or both, or neither? Why do all of them except Zelda seem to only have their colors as identifiers? Why is the Realm of the Heavens, which has never been mentioned before unless it's somehow the Sacred Realm, sealed within 4 stones held by 4 different knights? The answer is that it doesn't matter because Miyamoto apparently believes wholeheartedly that video games should not have stories. Who fucking Ray? The first half or so of Stage 2 of Level 8 is once again based around side-scrolling and once again fails to fully capitalize on this because the developers needed this to play like Four Swords and not a real Zelda game. Yeah, it's just annoying. And here is arguably the longest note I've made for this project so far. I don't know who this game is for. It's too complicated to be a pick-up-and-play casual game for multiplayer, and it's too simple to be a sit-down and focus game for single or multiplayer. It's too hard for a younger, more inexperienced audience, but there's no strategy involved for the hardcore, dedicated difficulty audience. The story is too complicated and in-your-face for gameplay purists, it's too simple and de-emphasized for story purists, and for anyone in between, it's completely disconnected from the main gameplay loop. The story doesn't fit naturally with the gameplay style, and they didn't alter any of the gameplay to fit the narrative. Shadow Link's appearances are pretty much never fun, either just getting in the way and annoying players or being a terribly programmed mini-boss. The actual bosses are almost all rehashes of previous bosses from the series, and few, if any, have creative strategies to fighting them that take advantage of the four-player concept. Even Four Swords had enemies like Hikun and Nokun, which took advantage of there being multiple links at play. This game only ever spawns in more and more enemies, or makes large enemies which deal several hearts of damage each hit and take dozens of attacks, even when they aren't supposed to be full bosses. I'm sure someone will complain that I'm judging the game unfairly because I played it in single player and it's supposed to be a multiplayer game. I disagree with this idea. First off, I don't think I would have fewer complaints if I played multiplayer, I think I would just have different ones. Instead of complaining about the GBA screen popping up every minute or two, I would be complaining about having to constantly look down at the GBAs and back up at the TV. Instead of complaining about the controller not using the buttons in intelligent ways, I'd be complaining about being forced to use a GBA to control a game for the GameCube. Instead of complaining about the formation and swapping mechanics being clunky and unintuitive, I'd be complaining about having to coordinate with other players to do things that are made overly complicated to justify there being 4 links. See? But second, and more importantly, this isn't like the original Four Swords, where it was always built to be exclusively multiplayer, and only got a single-player mode added in years later in a re-release. The game shipped from launch with the option of being single-player, advertised to be playable in single-player. The back of the box even states that it can be played with one player. So if the game doesn't work in single-player, that's not an unfair judgment of a game in an unfortunate setting, that's just a flaw with the game. This is almost certainly the worst game I've played for this project, possibly even the worst Zelda game I've ever played. Yes, I wasn't fond of Four Swords, but for the most part, that was just because it wasn't the kind of game I wanted to play, along with a few flaws that the Anniversary Edition mostly introduced. Four Swords Adventures, meanwhile, is clearly trying to be closer to a traditional Zelda game than a Four Swords game, and it ends up being worse than both. The worst part is, there was clearly some effort put in to make the game good. Some of the puzzles are genuinely clever, pretty much all of the upgraded items are incredibly cool, and I even think a few elements of the story are interesting. The problem is, these few rays of light are packaged in a game that is, from start to finish, an absolute chore to get through. It may be one of the shortest games since A Link to the Past, but every hour I spent playing it felt wasted. I am never playing this again for as long as I possibly can. Fuck this game.
Yeah, that's about it.
Now on to Minish Cap. Hopefully that doesn't disappoint. I have just beat The Legend of Zelda, the Minish Cap. That was a lot of fun.
Minish Cap is the 12th game in the Zelda series, originally released for the Game Boy Advance. It's the third and final entry in the Four Swords trilogy, being a prequel to the other 2 games. It's also the last game in the series, so far, developed by Capcom, more specifically their subsidiary Flagship. Fun fact, Flagship also developed 2 Kirby games, Amazing Mirror and Squeak Squad. It's weird how they made games for big Nintendo series, but only on handhelds. Almost like Nintendo views their handheld games as less important than console games, so they want to invest less effort in them. Anyways,
I was a little nervous, after Four Swords and Four Swords Adventures, but, I love that. I think that was a great game. It's much more of a traditional Zelda game than either of the other Four Swords games, but it works well in that format. There are still some problems, I wouldn't rate it as one of the best games in the series, but I think it's a very good game. Often overlooked because of just, very much a spin-off title, I guess, but it's very fun. I think Capcom really does know how to make a good Zelda game. I think if I had to pick, this is my second favorite of the Capcom Zelda games. This isn't quite as good as Oracle of Ages was necessarily, at least for me. I think it was a little bit better than Oracle of Seasons though. There are still some problems. The 2-button thing with the GBA is still a pain, and they didn't necessarily have to give the Kinstones their own dedicated button. And if they did, you know, it's fine, but I don't know. But yeah, it was a lot of fun. I enjoyed that. I think I'm optimistic.
Minish Cap is a prequel, not only to Four Swords and Four Swords Adventures, but to pretty much all Zelda games. Hell, the castle town in this game is just called Hyrule Town, like the town is all that exists of Hyrule at this point. Is that actually the intended meaning?
I don't know, it's just a weird name.
However, Minish Cap does something very important, something that the Zelda lore has always needed. It gives an incredible, in-depth origin story to Link's hat.
Oh, finally, I've been wondering about that ever since Zelda 1.
So we start the game by escorting Zelda to the Picori Festival, a celebration of when tiny little creatures came from the sky 100 years ago and gave humanity a sacred sword.
And no, not that sacred sword, and no, not those creatures from the sky.
Suddenly, a mysterious sorcerer named Vati, who won the animal competition, breaks the sacred sword and opens a treasure chest containing monsters, who then scatter across the land. Oh, also he turns Zelda to stone and then complains that the life force isn't in the chest.
For some reason, this game and Adventures really liked the idea of there being force in this world. I guess it ended up becoming canon between the next couple handheld games and even Skyward Sword. It's still weird that the general term is just force, though. Like, what is this, a Star Wars game?
Now, in order to save the princess, our blonde hero must find an old wise mentor so he can get a super powerful sword and defeat the dark figure who betrayed said mentor in the past.
I was joking!
Said mentor is Eslo, a member of the microscopic Minish who has been turned into a green hat. He acts as the Navi for the game, and honestly, he's one of the most annoying exposition fairies in the series. He's not terrible, he has a personality, and he mostly isn't too obnoxious most of the time, but in the early game he's really obnoxious with exposition. Plus, I mean, did we really need an explanation for the hat? I was fine just assuming it was a Kokiri thing. Ah well, at least he mostly stays out of the way during gameplay.
As for the gameplay, we have some new ideas. First up, we have the Kinstones. Collect different shaped pieces and you can fuse them with random NPCs across the game. Doing so will open pathways, unlock other NPCs, and start other side quests. It's basically the game's main side mechanic and it's fine.
Like, there's nothing wrong with it. The different colored pieces show up in different places, and it can be fun seeing what each fusion does. However, it's not that in depth. The shape of what piece you get is completely random, and it's always obvious what shape you need for a fusion once you start trying. You can't exactly strategize beyond just grinding up certain colored pieces or looking for specific fusions like the random cave walls with kinstone pieces, which advance the scene where Gorons open the way to a single bottle. Okay, look, I love getting bottles in Zelda games, but it takes literally the entire game to complete this side quest. Why just hide a bottle in here?
Overall, I think the idea was to give the game more of a focus on side quests, since the game does have fewer dungeons than most 2D Zelda games up to this point. I don't know, with Majora's Mask, the side quests all felt interconnected, and a lot of were actually emotional. Plus, the masks acted as a fairly unique reward for those side quests, which incentivized doing them all. Minish Cap doesn't really have that. At most, one side quest lets you get 2 or 3 different kinds of charms, which can raise your attack and defense temporarily. It's all fine, but it's just not that impactful. Oh well, at least the dungeon items are all cool.
Seriously, these items are all super unique. The least unique item you get in the dungeons is the lantern in the 4th dungeon. Still, even then, you use the lantern in very unique ways compared to other games in the series. Sure, there are standard Zelda items, you got the bow, bombs, power bracelets, flippers, all that, but you also have a jar that can suck things up and blow out huge gusts of air, a cane that flips things upside down that, yes, is incredibly situational, but they make the most out of those situations, a pair of mitts that let you dig through walls of dirt that previously acted as impassable obstacles. We even have the Rocks Cake, making its return from Oracle of Seasons and Four Swords, but being significantly better utilized.
Hell, even the Fourth Sword mechanic is used uniquely once it shows up. Being able to create clones with special icons on the floor and controlling all of them at once. Add that with the Dragon Scroll techniques that let you do more unique sword moves, and this is an incredible game on the gameplay front. This is a great game, but it's also a pretty small game. I beat it in a little over 3 days, and while I'm not the type to judge a Zelda game for having fewer dungeons, I think Majora's Mask is a lot better than Ocarina of Time, and it has like half the dungeons. It is pretty obvious looking at the world map how small Minish Cap is overall. Again, it's not a bad game, I just wanted something a little meatier. Still, I enjoyed it, and honestly, I'd say it's the second best game to use the Toon Link art style. I have to talk about the whole style problem now, don't I? Okay, let's do this shit.
At Space World 2000, the Nintendo conference which announced the GameCube, GBA, and Mario Self-Cest, a tech demo featuring advanced 3D fight between Link and Ganondorf was shown off, based on their appearances in Ocarina of Time. People were super excited. Did this mean we were getting an updated, realistic-looking Zelda game?
You call that realistic? Toy Story 1 had better-looking humans.
In reality, the clip was basically just a short proof of concept they threw together just for the event. There were plans at one point to stick with the style first used in Ocarina of Time, but these plans ultimately fell through since the developers didn't really have any ideas for it and Aonuma hated how derivative it looked. So they scrapped that idea, and eventually designer Yoshiki Haruhana created a cartoony design for a young Link that the team ended up latching onto. Pretty soon they had the essential components to make Wind Waker.
And let's be clear here, Wind Waker on GameCube looks so much better than the Space World demo. Like, sure, the Space World demo doesn't look completely horrible, but Wind Waker just looks better for the GameCube. Unfortunately, a lot of fans were less than thrilled with this art direction, decrying it as kiddie and unrealistic.
So, the next time they revealed a 3D Zelda game, they went in a very different direction. Super realistic, high fantasy tone, tons of callbacks to Ocarina of Time. It was a complete 180 in terms of style from Wind Waker, and fans were pumped. Except Wind Waker fans.
Yeah, doing a big 180 in style will do that to you. Keep in mind, Wind Waker wasn't too warmly received when it came out, but a lot of people did still like it. Hell, some people liked the graphical style in particular, so changing it to look more like a Peter Jackson film wasn't without controversy.
And so, to this day, the flame wars rage on. Wind Waker fans decry Twilight Princess as lacking color and personality, trying too hard to be dark and serious. Twilight Princess fans decry Wind Waker for being immature and unengaging, being more for kids than for longtime fans. And to both camps, I have just one thing to say.
Will you idiots just shut up?
Do you really think that either of these games are better just because they look a certain way? That somehow a game being more stylized makes it for kids, or a game being more realistic makes it dull? What fucking planet do you live on in which this is how you judge fucking anything?
Look, we live in a world of entertainment where I would think it's been proven that none of this makes sense. Disney has been trying to point out that cartoons can be deep, serious, and for all ages, ever since Walt was alive. And I somehow doubt anyone who's seen the state of filmmaking these days would think something looking real means it can't be fun. Like seriously, Marvel doesn't underpay CG artists and ruin storytelling for you to think cartoons are immature.
This kind of argument infuriates me, because what style a game has, what tone it goes for, and how those mesh together, those are not what makes a game good or bad. If your biggest problem with Sonic Frontiers is cartoon characters taking things seriously, then I don't think you actually give a shit about the game. If you think Kirby games are just for kids all because Kirby is pink and friendly, you clearly haven't paid any actual attention to them. And if you treat the plot of God of War as more serious than Metroid just because God of War was never in pixel art, you probably shouldn't be allowed to talk about video games online. Or in general.
What matters with style and tone is how it meshes with the game itself. If you made Wind Waker with Twilight Princess's style with no other changes, it would be terrible. If you made Twilight Princess in Wind Waker's style without a change in gameplay, no one would like it. In fact, when Aonuma told Miyamoto he wanted to change the style for the next Zelda game, Miyamoto realized this. He told Aonuma, look, you can't just change the style and nothing else. Come up with some gameplay ideas that fit the style you want, then come back to me with that. And you know what? He did. He made a game that fit a more grounded, realistic style. And that's why the style works there. So no, the Toon Link art style was not a problem that the developers had to overcome. The rapidly approaching 7th generation was.
By 2004, the Zelda team were working on 2 brand new video games. One, a direct sequel to Wind Waker for the newly released Nintendo DS, and the other, the next 3D Zelda game developed for the GameCube. The latter was incredibly well received, giving fans hope that this would be the hardcore realistic Zelda game for GameCube they'd wanted ever since the year 2000. However, in the background, the team was running into a bit of trouble.
Aonuma was worried because while the DS game was clearly extremely innovative and unique, Twilight Princess wasn't. The game was fine, but it just wasn't clicking into place yet. Plus, at this point, Nintendo was losing a lot of faith in the GameCube, and their next console was already on its way. So, the team began reworking the game to work on the Wii, though they initially didn't have the motion controls actually control the sword. The reason they gave was because Link is traditionally left-handed, it would feel weird to control for the majority of right-handed consumers. The only option they could even think of to solve this problem would have been to mirror the game in order to preserve necessary angles and design. So they mirrored the whole game.
I've just finished playing Twilight Princess HD. I really like that.
As with Link's Awakening, I played some of the original Twilight Princess. Specifically, I played up to Wolf Link first waking up in Hyrule Castle. I also specifically played the Wii version for that, so I have opinions.
That was a very good game. I absolutely loved that. That was amazing. I was worried going into it because, I really liked Wind Waker, and a lot of people who really like Wind Waker really don't like Twilight Princess, and I don't understand why, because I loved both. It is a very well-designed game. It is very fun to get good at. Probably the closest I've come to 100%ing one of these games since Link's Awakening. I guess my main takeaway would be, it is a bit derivative of Ocarina of Time, but it still very much goes in its own direction, and it does a lot of original things. Not a big fan of the Wii version. The motion controls feel a bit tacked on, which makes sense because they kind of were. Swinging the Wiimote is basically just pressing the attack button as opposed to, actually trying in any way to match your motions. Really not worth flipping the whole game mirror-wise. Although it does make for a interesting tradition nowadays with hero modes and whatnot. Yeah, Twilight Princess, good game, really like it.
Twilight Princess begins with Link being told that Twilight is when ghosts come out.
Not particularly subtle, but I'm on board.
The story of Twilight Princess is complicated. We've got multiple different factions, some working together, some directly opposed, and some ostensibly being aligned one way, but whose majority is actually aligned in opposition. We have the Bulblins, who attack Link, his girlfriend, and the kids of their village, presumably under orders of the Twilight. We have the Twilight, the descendants of sorcerers who were banished to the Twilight Realm, who are led by Zant and are also possibly being used by him against their will. We have Ganondorf, who was revealed after a while to be directly controlling Zant in an attempt to destroy the world. We have the Hylian's army, who are badly beaten by the Twilight and honestly don't do all that much to help. We have the Resistance, who lead Link to places he needs to go for his second set of MacGuffins and take out big groups of enemies in that final dungeon, but otherwise are just kind of there. We have the Monkeys, who are monkeys, and at the center of it all, we have Link, the descendant of the Hero of Time, but another true heir to the Twilight's royal family, and a few of their friends who help them to actually save the world.
Oh, and Zelda's there too, I guess. This is one of the most in-depth plots we've seen in a Zelda game, and I haven't even gotten into all the subplots. Like, seriously, Link has a full love interest and a little brother figure, and I barely mentioned them. There's also the Zoras returning in full force, and the Gorons, who are... well, they certainly were made by real humans in our world.
Okay, let me be clear. I do like the game's story and its plot. I think most, if not all, of the characters are incredibly engaging, and the writing is extremely well done. Are there problems, though? God, yes. I love Zant's crazy-ass breakdown and subsequent boss fight a lot, but it basically comes out of nowhere and barely makes sense. The Alias subplot is basically put on hold for at least a third of the game, only to come back in full swing for the final third, and I know this thing has already been picked to death, but seriously, what the hell did the dozens of Ilias mean? Was it supposed to be like, oh, if you had infinite power, you might be tempted to create a load of copies of your girlfriend? Everything else in the sequence makes sense as a metaphor for the backstory of the Twilight, but this ending... why?
Now, do these flaws mean the game is worse? Well, it's a matter of opinion. Personally, while I think some of the writing can be a bit melodramatic, I also think it's incredibly engaging. I also think the character animation is much better than people give it credit for. Like, you can get a sense for Link's personality just through his facial expressions. That takes skill. Also, I'm not gonna lie, I really like Ilia. I know she's really not a major character for most of the game, and the go-to ship for this game will probably always be Midnight Link, but I like Ilia, okay? Look, I read fanfics focusing on Melon at a very formative age. My brain is wired weird. So, yeah, I really like the game's story. As for the gameplay, oh my god, I love this.
Twilight Princess is one of the most varied and fun gameplay experiences in the series so far. Not only do we have some of the most advanced sword fighting scene yet, we also have one of the most interesting bows in the series, horse riding that feels extremely dynamic, a variety of useful bombs with their own bags, a boomerang with far greater usage than just cutting things, claw shots that makes the hook shots pull with the grappling hooks hanging and lets you get full Spider-Man by the end, a spinner that is entirely situational but still absurdly fun to master, a rod for controlling statues that is much of the same, a wrecking ball that lets you fuck enemies up, a slingshot and fishing rod that, well, they can't all be winners.
Hell, they even came up with creative uses for the iron boots. Like, sure, you use them to sink in water, that much is standard, but you'll also use them to gain more weight to counteract the Goron's strength and strong winds. Plus, they're magnetic, so the requisite fire temple gives you magnetic walls you can walk across while wearing them. And speaking of the dungeons...
I'll be perfectly honest, these are probably my favorite Zelda dungeons, not only so far, but also ever. The Goron Mines, as I discussed, actually makes the iron boots interesting to use, and it uses a very unique kind of dungeon progression in finding the Goron Elders. The Forest Temple is generically named, but the monkey idea makes it fun to explore, plus it introduces the excellent Gale Boomerang. The Arbiter's Grounds makes so many different ideas and utilizes all of your items to their best extent. The Temple of Time manages to make backtracking through a full dungeon genuinely interesting with the Dominion Rod and the giant statue, plus the nostalgia is palpable. Hyrule Castle and Snow Peak Ruins both feel like extremely real places, with Snow Peak having a unique concept in the hunt for treasure chests, and Hyrule Castle being the most climactic final dungeon scene yet. The city in the sky is... oh, this dungeon is so good.
Hell, even Lakebed Temple, the Water Temple, is actually incredible, not least because it's actually fun. Like, seriously, I think redirecting water is a lot more fun than the gimmicks of the Water Temple and Great Bay. Really, the only one that isn't that amazing is Palace of Twilight, which I still think is great, but it's incredibly short. Otherwise, though, this is an incredibly solid set of dungeons.
The game's overworld is also very fun to explore, if a little samey at times. Don't get me wrong, I enjoy how much they do with Hyrule Field in this game, but having Hyrule Field be like 75% of the overworld, that's a bit excessive. Still, we have very interesting locations within that overworld, from the fiery canyon of Kakariko Village, the Wild West-inspired Hidden Village, the vast and deep Lake Hylia, the harsh but sprawling Gerudo Desert, the frigid climb of Snow Peak, and of course Hyrule Castletown, arguably the densest and most populated castle town scene to date. Like in other games, even Ocarina of Time, we generally had to assume that most locations had more people inhabiting them, that the towns actually had a higher population, but you just couldn't see them. With this game's Castletown, you can see just how big Castletown really is, with various shops, houses, and hangout spots, all only counting what the player can directly access.
I will say, it feels less fun to just explore and find new locations compared to Wind Waker. Don't get me wrong, there is stuff to find in Hyrule Field and other overworld locations, but they're generally pretty small things, bugs or individual ghosts, so basically just 2 side quests in the full game. There are also pieces of heart, 5 of which add up to a full heart container now, for some reason. But overall, it's just not that fun to explore for me. That said, this game is still extremely good. I don't think not being as focused on exploration makes the game worse. Gear for War deals is brutal, by the way, and that's all I'm going to say about that.
As for the HD version, first off, I think this glow-up is great. Don't get me wrong, I don't think the original looks terrible, it's just stylized enough to look decent still, but, well, it's the Wii and GameCube, not exactly bastions of resolution. The normal mode's orientation and controls are based on the GameCube version, though the hero mode included in this release actually mirrors the game to match the Wii version, which is neat. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention with Wind Waker HD, the Wii U re-releases added in harder modes, which increase damage taken and completely remove spawning hearts from the pickups list. I only played the standard mode though. I'm a wuss.
Twilight Princess HD also made a few major changes to the game, primarily in addition. First off, we have the Ghost Lantern, which makes the post-Souls side quests so much easier. Next up, we have the stamps, scattered across random chests across the game. Like the Tingle Bottle, these are kinda useless now that Miiverse is dead. Still, at least there's some nice art for each stamp, including the Hylian alphabet. And finally, we have the Cave of Shadows, a brutal bonus dungeon like the Cave of Ordeals, but only for Wolflink. It's also locked behind an amiibo, so yeah, it's fine, just super hard, that's about it. The only reward is an even bigger wallet that lets you hold 9,999 rubies. Otherwise, all the changes for HD were just various quality of life tweaks.
Look, I love the gamepad map, but I'm so glad they kept the mini-map on screen in this game. Anyways, the various wallets were all expanded, with the base wallet now holding 500 rupees instead of 300, and the final non-amiibo wallet holding 2,000 instead of 1,000. The Tears of Light were streamlined slightly, with 4 cut from each section. You can have 3 items equipped, up from 2 in the GameCube version, though down from 4 in the Wii version. The gamepad lets you switch from human to wolf without having to talk to Midna once you get the ability. The map is improved, showing more important things like the Hourglass and mini-games, plus how many post-souls have been collected in a given region. Rupees have been made much more convenient since they don't play the explanation cutscene every time you get one after reloading a save game, and you don't put them back in chests if you don't hold them.
That one can be annoying if you care a lot about using rupees well, but for completionists, it is a godsend.
And beyond that, various small tweaks were made, like your sword not hitting walls directly to make tight quarters more bearable, or various animations being sped up. Overall, if you actually tried to quantify all the changes made, there would be dozens, if not over 100. However, ultimately, they all just add up to this being the definitive way to play Twilight Princess.
Look, I don't like the motion controls, okay?
Moving on to Phantom Hourglass. I have just beat Legend of Zelda Phantom Hourglass. That was fun.
Like we discussed before, alongside Twilight Princess, the Zelda team were developing a DS sequel to Wind Waker. This project was set to take full advantage of the DS hardware, being a very innovative game. And indeed, the game is very innovative, especially in how it controls. A shame that made a lot of people hate it.
I know a lot of people really don't like Phantom Hourglass, and I can see why. There are definite issues, The touchscreen controls, I'm fine with them, but they are a bit unintuitive at times. And of course, a lot of people have issues with the Temple of the Ocean King, which I get, it's a lot. I don't know, maybe it's just because I kind of grew up with the game, but kind of have a warmer opinion on it. And the game does do some genuinely cool stuff. It has some genuinely good ideas. It's just, there are a lot of issues, but if you're willing to get past them, then you have a really fun game in store.
Phantom Hourglass begins with a recap of Wind Waker, before revealing Link is still just as asleep as ever. Link has been traveling with Tetra and her crew, hoping to find some new land to inhabit, because nothing bad has ever happened because of a group of settlers going to a previously unknown continent. However, at the moment, they're focused on finding a ship rumored to exist called the Ghost Ship.
What, the place I raided to get a piece of the Triforce?
Nope, this is a completely different ghost ship, which comes up on the ship all of a sudden. Tetra jumps on board, suddenly disappears with a Sheik, and Link jumps after her, only to fall into the water immediately.
Well, that's another branch of the timeline.
He wakes up on a beach being pestered by a fairy, because why the heck not? This is Sela, whose name might be a pun like Navi or Tattle, but if it is, it's quite a bit clunkier. She brings him to an old man named Oshus, who totally isn't more important than he initially seems, just trust me. They get a sword, Link goes looking for a sailor, and then they venture into the Temple of the Ocean King. 20 hours later, they reach the bottom of the Temple of the Ocean King, kill an eldritch evil, and go back to Tetra's ship.
Well, that was a short game.
Phantom Hourglass's story, it's fine. It's not offensively bad, it's not mind-bogglingly spectacular. There are some interesting characters and a couple engaging subplots, but overall there's just not much to write home about. Seriously, the most interesting parts of the story are the N64 builders being an ancient kingdom and the racist seal people not being proven wrong. Otherwise, there's a deadbeat dad who goes unnamed, there's a mechanic who wants you to stream IRL, there are racially questionable Gorons again.
There is sort of character development for Link's companions, namely Sela and the sailor, Linebeck. Linebeck became slightly less greedy and cowardly, and Sela realizes she's actually a holy spirit, I think. Coming from the super complex plot of Twilight Princess and even the creative prequel Minish Cap, it's pretty weak. I guess what I'd say about the story is it's serviceable. Not terrible, not great, but also not distracting.
As for the presentation, well, it could be worse. Graphics-wise, the game is fine. It's not terrible, it's just incredibly simplistic. The 3D models are fairly low polygon, so if you're playing on an HD emulator, it'll probably look like ass, but playing on a DS or even a 3DS, it's not that obvious. Same goes for the music, hardly high quality, but it's fine for a DS game. Only real thing is, the sound clips, especially for Link, are incredibly compressed. It's not surprising, but it definitely is there.
I have to talk about the gameplay, don't I?
Okay, look. Controlling the game with the touchscreen works. It gives you a full 360 degrees of movement in a DS game, it lets you walk at different speeds, and it lets you attack enemies fine enough. The problem isn't that you have to use the touchscreen to play. The problem is that you have to use the touchscreen for everything. Every item, every interaction, everything is controlled exclusively with the touchscreen. The only thing any of the buttons do is bring up menus and bring down the map. I guess you can technically use the shoulder buttons to pull out your equipped item, but you still need to touch the screen to actually use the item. It works, the game is clearly built around this control scheme, but having to stop everything if you want to use an item is still so clunky. At least in older 2D games, you could move while aiming your bow.
Again, the game works with this control scheme. It functions and it never feels brutally unfair. I just would prefer the option of something a little less clunky. And I especially don't appreciate the one random ghost who's like, oh, if only I hadn't been so stubborn and said I wish I could use the D-pad. Like, great job, Nintendo. You were stupid and smug. Gold star.
However, this is only about half the gameplay. You see, in order to navigate the wide world of Phantom Hourglass, you must ride aboard the SS Lineback and navigate the ocean. Yeah, I don't like this. Sailing in this game is basically just drawing a line, then looking out for places you need to shoot once you get a cannon. There are things they try to make things more engaging, salvaging treasure chests in a kinda clunky minigame, fishing in a very clunky minigame, and that's about it. It's incredibly dumb, and typically ends up being either super boring or super frustrating. Like, oh no, this pirate is coming for me, I need to get away, but I already plotted a course and she wasn't even on the map when I did that, so now I need to pull up the router, chart a new course, and try to avoid her attacks, and oops, too much going on, now you're boarded, and you have to do a dumb rub the screen really fast combat minigame.
Yeah, I think I prefer the touchscreen bullshit from before.
Okay, I've been pretty down on this game so far, so let me take a moment to talk about things I really like about it. First off, I love the map system in the game. You pretty much always have a decently detailed map of any location. However, for most of these maps, you can also draw your own marks on them, from symbols, codes, or just interesting spots to check out later. This is incredibly useful and honestly a pretty creative use for the map. It feels sort of like a precursor to the pins or beacons you can put on the map in more recent entries, but with a lot more flexibility. Hell, one island even recommends you draw your own map for it, then use that map to solve the island's puzzle. Not that I recommend going for max detail, but it's still cool. Second, while none of the items are entirely new, it's just boomerang, bombs, bow, blam, they are used in interesting ways. The boomerang following the path you trace is a wonderful translation of the mechanic from Wind Waker and Twilight Princess. The bomb too actually acts similarly, which makes them a lot more useful than usual. The grappling hook mostly acts like a hook shot, but you can also attach 2 points to use it as a tightrope or a slingshot. And the hammer basically acts as a long-distance weapon since your fairy holds it instead of you. Sure, the bow, bombs, and shovel are all still a bit generic, but honestly, so is the lantern in Twilight Princess, and I'm not deducting points from that.
I also think the dungeons are pretty fun, though wouldn't rank them among the best of the series. I think the final unique dungeon, Mudo's Temple, is pretty cool, especially the build-up to it. Like, exploring the Isle of Ruins and Isle of the Dead is fairly fun, since the latter is an interesting puzzle from the map. Then the former changes as you explore, it's basically its own mini-dungeon. I also like the logic puzzle with the Anuki, even if, again, the game really doesn't acknowledge how fucked up that subplot really is. Like, the Yuk are just normal, non-demonic creatures most of the time, but they get banished to the inhospitable side of the island, and the Anuki get the cozy igloos. And as soon as a single one sneaks into the village, the chief sends Link to kill them all? And like, it's never acknowledged how fucked up that is? Look, I like the Temple of the Ocean King, okay?
Like, don't get me wrong, I get why some people would hate it, but I really think it's cool. Revisiting this one location and being able to make more and more progress each time, getting equipment that makes earlier floors easier and faster, it's fun to me, especially with the final descent for the final boss where you finally get to kill the otherwise invulnerable phantoms. I don't know, it's just fun for me.
So yeah, is it the worst game in the series? God no. But it's still not one of the best, at least for me. Especially because 2 years later, got a game that's better in every way.
Now moving on to Spirit Tracks, which is the next game in the chain. Better than Phantom Hourglass, I believe. I have just beat Legend of Zelda Spirit Tracks. I like it.
Released in 2009, Spirit Tracks is the third and final entry in the Wind Waker storyline, and it's built on the same engine as Phantom Hourglass. It received pretty decent reviews on release, though these days you don't hear many people talking about it. Like, even Mega Zelda nerd PBG just pretends these games don't exist, which makes sense. I mean, it's not like these are follow-ups to one of the best games in the series, with this game having interesting lore. Oh wait.
I think it's better than Phantom Hourglass. There isn't quite as much free exploration, but honestly I think the train mechanic is a lot more dynamic than the ship mechanic from Phantom Hourglass. It's more fun for me. I think the Tower of Spirits is a lot better than the Temple of the Ocean King. I like the Temple of the Ocean King more than most people, but I think the Tower of Spirits does do what the Temple of the Ocean King was trying to do a lot better. I think the side quests are more interesting. I think Spirit Tracks is a lot of fun. It's very creative, and I think it gets a bad rap just because, you know, this touchscreen controls. I don't think it's as bad as people say. I think it's a lot of fun, but I'm not exactly going to call anyone a fake fan if they don't like it.
Spirit Tracks begins with lore, and quite a bit of it. This backstory is interesting. It's almost the lore for the next console game, Skyward Sword, but with the solution being train tracks instead of Skyrock. This is the land of New Hyrule, founded by Tetra and probably the other pirates, including Link, but we now have a new Link who, I don't even know what the lore explanation is for the hero stuff now.
Look, I have my own Zelda theories, but that's what I have AO3 for. Even there, I'm not sure how the whole hero spirit thing works.
This is Link, a soon-to-be engineer, training under totally not Gonzo and living with actually just Nico.
Because apparently Hellions live for over a century, I don't know.
So they go to the castle so Link can get his engineer's certificate from the princess,
Because delegation is illegal in New Hyrule. Look, I don't write this shit.
who asks him to meet her privately in her room afterwards, then gives him clothes, and has him change right there and then.
Too easy.
You see, the train tracks that line the land have been disappearing, and Zelda suspects the Chancellor is up to something. 5 minutes later, the Chancellor attacks the trains, reveals his devil horns, and kidnaps Zelda's body.
I don't know, maybe he's just misunderstood.
So now, Zelda's spirit is split from her body, the tracks need to be remade by holy power, and something has to be done to prevent the Demon King Melodus from destroying the world. How do we do all that? Big choo-choo train.
I actually really like this game's story. It's not too complicated, but it's just enough to be engaging. Link and Zelda are adorable. The world feels more connected than Phantom Hourglass, or even Wind Waker. And the whole game just has a certain personality to it that makes it a lot more interesting to watch play out. Plus, it's neat to have Zelda in a bigger role for the first time since Wind Waker. Like seriously, between then and Spirit Tracks, Zelda was damsel in distress, a statue, rarely seen damsel in distress, and a statue. Seriously.
As for the gameplay, it's Phantom Hourglass, but now with double taps to roll. The controls are more or less the exact same as the last game, so there's not much to say about it. However, what is new are the items. Well, most of them anyways. We still have the boomerang, bow, and bombs, though now the bombs are an optional item, and like you can beat the whole game without them, so any puzzle that could use them, you either have another way of breaking things, or they just put palm flowers there all the time. Alright, I mean, it stands out at least. However, more noteworthy are the 3 brand new items, the Whirlwind, the Whip, and the Sand Wand.
Whirlwinds, Whips, and Wands is also the title of my new Western Harry Potter satire.
The Sand Wand is probably the punching bag of Zelda items, and for good reason, it is super situational. However, like the Spinner and Dominion Rod, being super situational doesn't mean it's any less fun to use. Look, am I weird for how much I enjoy making walls and platforms with this stylus? Am I weird from liking the mechanic where you stroke these sand enemies to make them harden up and become vulnerable? Am I weird for thinking the block rotating puzzles are fun? I mean, probably, but I'm also weird for a lot of reasons. The whip, meanwhile, acts basically like the grappling hook from Wind Waker between attacking enemies with a strike and stealing certain things from them, and swinging from wooden posts. It's also pretty cool stealing it from the mid-boss of the Ocean Temple, so extra points there. Finally, the whirlwind uses the microphone. Okay.
Yeah, the mic gets a lot more use in this game compared to Phantom Hourglass. The whirlwind uses it to blow wind, obviously, but it's also used to play the game's instrument, the spirit flute. So it went from an ocarina to a baton to a wolf's howl to a pan flute. Makes sense. It's alright, a bit tricky to avoid playing notes in between the ones you want. Fortunately, for any songs you have to play in standard gameplay, the notes are all next to each other. However, for the jam session things with the sages of the game, it can be trickier. That said, I didn't fail a single one through the whole game, so, buy my album?
As the flip side of the standard gameplay this time, we have train conducting, which is relegated entirely to the rails. Is it weird how much more I enjoy this to the Phantom Hourglass ship stuff? For one thing, it's a lot more dynamic. In addition to having control over speed, stopping, and reversing, you can actually switch directions at turns whenever you want, with the drawn route just dictating which direction you start in and what direction you turn by default. This makes playing it feel a lot more active, so you don't just doze off until you reach your destination. You have control of this train and you need to get it to the next stop for yourself. There's also the strategy involved with the demon trains, the monsters you have to either avoid or defeat, and at some points you have passengers and cargo you need to transport, which both have their own rules and issues to deal with. It is so much more interesting than the ship stuff.
The only real disappointing thing is the game's pretty short. Like, don't get me wrong, most of the 2D Zeldas are shorter than the 3D ones, that's just how the series works. But Spirit Tracks only has 6 required dungeons, one of them being the Tower of Spirits, and then it's done. For comparison, I finished a decent chunk of Phantom Hourglass, and I 100% completed Spirit Tracks within the same amount of time. It's a good game, but it just sort of runs out of steam at a certain point. Oh, runs out of...
And so, we're nearing the end. Only 3 games left, not counting the 3 games I'm just not covering in this project. So before we start wrapping up, let's talk about, I don't know, everything.
Look, there's a lot of stuff I wanted to talk about in this video, but I just haven't had a chance to. Don't blame me, blame how big this damn franchise is. Seriously, fucking 20 damn games.
Hyrule Historia, the big book for virgins. This is the first semi-official book released for the Zelda series, and it details not only the development of our next game, Skyward Sword, but also concept art from across the series and the official timeline for the games. This was where people learned that the hero of time apparently had a 1 in 3 chance of fucking dying, apparently. This is a fun one. I think it does a good job of fitting all the game's lore into a set space, though some of the claims are a bit odd. Apparently the Sacred Realm was only sealed years after Ganon was sealed inside it. Seems a bit backwards. Then again, it's linked to the past's lore.
So frankly, we're lucky we have something legible.
There are other books in this series, an art book that just collects random bits of artwork and some interviews with artists, an encyclopedia that just entirely makes shit up. Oh wow, I didn't know Castletown showed up in Majora's Mask. However, the other one that I have is Creating a Champion, based on Breath of the Wild. This one is a lot more focused on the game's development history, with a lot more concept art and official information. There is a history section though, and it is pretty damn comprehensive. Did you know Master Koga actually inherited his name?
God damn it, I said I wouldn't talk about the Warriors games.
This is a fun read, though if you don't care about Breath of the Wild specifically, it's probably not for you. There are other books based on the Zelda series, a scholastic book with elements from Ocarina of Time which absolutely can't be canon, a few similar books to the Dark Horse ones, but based on other specific games, a couple kids' books based on the original NES games, and a surprising number of choose-your-own-adventure books. I've never owned any of these, but I did have an unofficial book based on philosophy. I link, therefore I am.
That's all it takes to get published? A pun worse than the official games? Give a link to the past credit, at least it used the name semi-cleverly.
I don't have this one anymore. Presumably I either lost it along with my original Wii U, or I donated it at some point because I thought gaming merch was cringe. 5 years later, and look at me now.
I like it!
Amiibo! Yeah, they exist, deal with it, atheists. I don't have any Zelda amiibo, unfortunately, although I did have a Young Link amiibo at one point. Again, Wii U box. But if you go online and look in the right places, you can find a collection of unofficial amiibo cards, which do a work of official games.
And I've got the Zelda ones in a plastic box. These are amiibo dupes, basically just NFC chips and little cardboard sleeves that tell you, hey, this is a furry. Some may argue these are cheap and less honorable. You should buy the official amiibo. That way, you support Nintendo. Yes, what better way to support an amoral corporation than paying hundreds to a scalper for something Nintendo doesn't even make anymore? Look, if you just want your in-game unlocks, these are fine. They aren't as fun as full figurines, but they're a lot more convenient. And this is how I was able to access the Cave of Shadows that I didn't beat. Jealous?
While I'm talking about shit I barely care about, fuck it, it's my video, I do what I want. Triforce Heroes, the best multiplayer Zelda if you hate multiplayer Zelda. I didn't want to replay it for this project, but it's an alright game, takes some of the ideas introduced in Four Swords and sort of truncates them to fit a more modular experience. Online play is good for something like this, especially since the game is a lot more fun in multiplayer, but I do think the single player is more than competent. Not as usable as Four Swords Anniversary, unfortunately, but the doppel system does work alright for what they were doing. Not everyone's cup of tea, and if I do replay it, I might fully hate it, but for what it is, it's alright.
Okay, what else? Y'all want to see my systems?
For this project, I had to use 4 systems to play the games: the Nintendo Switch, the 3DS, the Wii U, and the Wii. The Switch handled the NES, SNES, and N64 games, as well as Link's Awakening, Skyward Sword HD, and Breath of the Wild. The 3DS handled the original Link's Awakening, as well as the Oracle games, Four Swords Anniversary, Minish Cap, and the DS and 3DS games. Yes, I played Minish Cap on 3DS. Ambassador baby. The Wii U was pretty much just for Wind Waker and Twilight Princess HD, and the Wii handled the sections of the original Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword, as well as all of Four Swords Adventures. So I didn't play a full good game on my original childhood Wii. Sad.
Finally, just a little fun fact, not only do I own some version of all these games, digital or physical, I own at least one copy of almost every Zelda game I didn't play for this project. I have the original Wii U Hyrule Warriors, and the Switch version, plus Age of Calamity. Like I mentioned, I have a digital copy of Triforce Heroes, plus Cadence of Hyrule, digitally. Unfortunately, I don't have Link's Crossbow Training or the CDI games, nor do I have any of the Japanese exclusive games. Otherwise, yeah, I have all the Zelda games. But to be fair, I also have the Wii version of Super Mario All-Stars. I don't make good choices. I also have a bunch of Zelda clothes, but, green screen.
So, at last, we have come to the point of modernity. The era of the internet, YouTube, fan forums, people talking about video games as an art form. This was the point where people were talking about Zelda lore and how absolutely convoluted and impossible it really was. There were split timeline theories, single timeline theories, joke theories placing the whole series in a triangle. Something had to be done. And, well, the Wii controls for Twilight Princess were alright, but wouldn't it be nice to have more useful and integral motion controls rather than just waggle instead of pressing B?
So, with the help of the newly released Wii Motion Plus, Ranuma and his team got to work on the next big Zelda game. And this time, they weren't going to be making yet another sequel to Ocarina of Time. Instead, they were going back to the series' roots, by which I mean a prequel that just makes things way more complicated.
I have just beaten The Legend of Zelda Skyward Sword, and I loved it.
Apologies for even shittier audio than usual for those, by the way. The fan was louder than expected. Skyward Sword was the first and really only Zelda game designed specifically for the Wii. Released in 2011 to celebrate the franchise's 25th anniversary, it's a fairly controversial game amongst fans. And while opinions are still split on the game's quality, it isn't as hated these days as it once was. Which is good, because this game is amazing.
In general, I just think it's a really good game. I think it's really well made, it's well executed. A lot of the complaints people have, I really don't understand. People complain about the backtracking, oh, you go back to the same 3 locations over and over again, but do you? Because you're always doing new stuff. You're always exploring new regions. You're always activating new tests, new trials, new puzzles, new encounters. Is that really boring to you? Seriously? Are there some issues that I understand? Yeah. I think the Wii Motion Plus is good, but it is also very finicky in the original. I played entirely with button controls for this, and I think that was the right way to go, because I think it's a lot more user-friendly. When I was playing with the Wii mode, I thought that was also very fun, very cathartic, very it was suitably immersive. And again, I can understand if some people didn't feel that, but for me, I thought this was an amazing game.
Skyward Sword begins with a short backstory seen if you linger on the title screen. Millennia ago, demons devastated the world. In order to save her chosen people, the goddess sent her chosen people up into the sky on a giant floating rock.
The Gorons, Kikwi, Pirella, Magma, and robots, though? Fuck them.
In the present, a knight in training named Link is awoken by his totally not girlfriend Zelda. It's the day of the wing ceremony, and if he wins the contest of the day, he can graduate to the next class.
Seriously? Only one person moves up per year? Guess that explains why there's a total of 2 upperclassmen.
So, after a sequence of events involving local bullied Groofs and a sacred red Loftwing, Link wins the contest, gets a sailcloth, is pushed off a giant statue, goes flying with his absolutely platonic best friend Zelda, and then disaster strikes.
Because of course it does, it's still a Zelda game.
And now, in order to be reunited with his definitely not romantically interested pal who he's only going on an adventure to save because they're such good buddies...
Look, if this joke feels old to you already, just imagine how repetitive the game's actual humor is.
Link must take up the goddess sword and fulfill the prophecy, finally finishing the battle that the goddess fought against demons thousands of years ago. Along the way, he'll meet a woman who hates how many side quests he does, multiple dragons who are just kinda there, realize there's a giant god whale flying around the clouds that everyone knows exists and they just don't think it's a big deal, and maybe, just maybe, turn the goddess sword into the fabled Master Sword. But first, 2.5-hour pre-dungeon sequence.
I don't actually mind the opening before the first dungeon. Like, with the original version, I sped through the intro without taking on any unnecessary dialogue or side quests. And yeah, it took 2.5 hours to reach the first dungeon, but like, I was still playing a game. I was still doing interesting, fun things before getting to the first dungeon. Is the tutorial dumping in the original abrasive? Yeah, I'm not gonna argue that. I'm glad they toned it down for HD. But it's not like any content prior to the first dungeon in a game is completely wasted. Hell, in some games, I'd argue the non-dungeon gameplay is more fun than the dungeons. I mean, I think both are good in this game, but you know what I mean, right?
This is a very fun story, especially for die-hard Zelda fans. Hell, just exploring Skyloft and seeing characters both completely new and a little familiar feels so fun. Plus, all of the characters feel incredibly iconic, especially the major players. I mean, sure, I don't think your mom would be able to recognize most of them, but they are all rightly well beloved by the fandom. Or at least most of the fandom.
Admittedly, I wouldn't say the writing is perfect. There's a fair deal of melodrama, and like I mentioned earlier, some of the humor feels pretty forced. But like, I could poke holes like that in any of my favorite Zelda games. I love Wind Waker, and Tetra and the Pirates all but disappear after the second Forsaken Fortress visit. I think Twilight Princess is amazing, and the Ilias subplot really should have been less ignored during the second act. And spoilers, I love Breath of the Wild, and my god is Rivali's memory in the base game obnoxious. So, no, the writing isn't exactly perfect, but Skyward Sword probably still has some of the best in the series. Although, man, the Petra subplot really has no good answer.
Moving on to the gameplay, I'm gonna be perfectly honest, this is a lot of fun. This is the most detailed swordplay seen in the series, even compared to Twilight Princess. Originally for the 3D Zeldas, we had a horizontal strike, a vertical strike, a stab, and the spin attack. But that's about it as far as detailed swordplay goes. Wind Waker introduced more active fighting with pseudo QTEs, and Twilight Princess made things deeper over time with the sword skills, but Skyward Sword's focus on the Wii motion means we have full control over where the sword is, to the point where even basic enemies have adapted to block attacks. Seriously, in what other game do the base level mooks block your strikes if you aren't paying attention?
Do Koopas count as base level?
The sword fighting is incredibly fun, but I'd be lying if I said the novelty didn't wear off past a certain point. Don't get me wrong, they do their absolute best getting the most out of the directional slashes, but by the halfway point of the game, they've kind of run out of unique uses. It's just hit the enemy's weak point, avoid the block, distract them with your sword, or it's a fight where the direction of your slashes doesn't matter, in which case you can just waggle and win. There's still strategy most of the time, but it does lose a bit of its freshness. However, when the sword isn't bringing anything new, then you have to turn to your items. So, we have 8 items on the wheel, okay. We have the bug net and slingshot, the former just being a bit useful for the collection quests, and the latter being marginally useful throughout, but mostly just being a holding item prior to other long distance items. You also get the double claw shots like Twilight Princess from an overworld quest, with the other 2 similar quests unlocking the full swimming ability and better fireproofing. That leaves 5 active items from the dungeons. The beetle, which is a decently fun flying item, the bomb bag, which holds bomb flowers in this game, so you'll pretty much never run out of them, the gust bellows, which like a lot of items are incredibly situational but are still used very creatively, the whip, which works similarly to in Spirit Tracks but is a lot more fun with the directional usage, and the bow, which, yeah, it's the bow. Good as ever, not exactly innovative. Is it a bit disappointing that we don't get any new items in the back third of the game? Sure, a bit. However, this also gives each of the items at least some chance to shine. Like in Twilight Princess, like a third of the items have like 2 uses outside of their introductory dungeons. Wind Waker makes the hookshot feel like an afterthought. Hell, even in the 2D games, the mirror shield always feels like a disappointment. Here in Skyward Sword, the only item you get near the end of the game is possibly the Hylian shield, so every single item wheel item gets its moment in the sun.
Except the bug net. The bug net is still weird.
Beyond those, we have digging mitts that let you dig up spots on the ground and eventually go underground into tunnels, multiple different shields with varying durability and different strengths and weaknesses, 5 different bottles, and the medals, which are very cool but like the rings are a bit too situational for the limited inventory system. Oh yeah, we have a very limited inventory for bottles, shields, and medals. It also holds inventory upgrades for the slingshot, bombs, and bow. And the max for this is 8, which can't hold all the bottles and all the inventory upgrades if you want literally anything else. So you have to do shuffling at the item check with Petrus.
I'm not a big fan of inventory limits, I'm gonna be honest. Luckily, we have a much less limited wallet than usual, thanks to 2 things. First off, Beto sells extra wallets that hold 300 rupees each. There are 3, and they only cost 100 each, so you can buy them all with a starting wallet of 300 rupees. Secondly, the main reward for side quests in this game is a new collectible, Gratitude Crystals. Give those bad boys to a demon who screams with a little girl, and you can get up to the Tycoon wallet with 9,000 rupees. So in total, getting all available wallets, you can hold 9,900 rupees, all without completing anything too absurd. Well, aside from almost all side quests.
So, how about this world? It's pretty good. The world of Skyward Sword is split between 2 different realms, the sky and the surface. The sky holds Skyloft, which is a very detailed and in-depth settlement, and then a bunch of islands that have at most 1 building. No, but seriously, Skyloft is super cool. We have families, houses, a school that can at most teach 1 class at a time, and even a cave with keys and choo-choos. We also have the Skyloft Bazaar, where you can buy ammo and shields, brew some potions, mess around with the items in your adventure pouch.
That's the limited inventory, by the way.
Upgrade various items, and get a hint from the fortune teller. No heart piece guidance this time, unfortunately, but at least his eyes are super weird. Beyond Skyloft, or more accurately under it, we have the surface world, which is itself split into 3 regions. Faerun with the Sealed Grounds, Faerun Woods, Deep Woods, and Lake Floria, Alden with Elden Volcano and more of the volcano, and Lanayru with the Lanayru Mines, the Lanayru Desert, the Lanayru Sand Sea, and Lanayru Gorge. 3 distinct regions, which are completely separated from each other. I mean, it's fine, it's not like every other Zelda game is completely 100% connected. Every 3D Zelda has had loading screens between major locations, and hell, Wind Waker has a huge ocean between every location. At least the 3 surface regions are pretty vast and complex. Elden is definitely the least varied, with it mainly being a volcano and caves within the volcano, but it does spice things up in the 3rd revisit with an equipment finding stealth section.
And if you don't like the Elden stealth section, that's fine, it's pretty subjective.
Faerun is definitely the region with the most internal variety. The story explanation for it is that the nourishing waters of the region help to grow the forests, so connecting the water section to the forest does make sense. I know some people really hate water sections in Zelda, and I do get it, but I really do like the swimming controls in this game. I mean, the Twilight Princess and Skyward Sword swimming is basically just the Sora swimming from Majora's Mask, but slower, and thus easier to control. Finally, we have Lanayru, which has the dual gimmicks of desert and time travel. Basically, it used to be a vibrant grassy mine next to a vast sea, but over time aridification turned it into a vast desert filled with dead robots. However, if you hit these rocks spread across the area, you can turn the area back in time in order to restore broken objects, destroy newer structures, and resurrect the dead robots. Only for them to die again the second you hit a different rock.
Try not to think about it, okay? Just assume that after the game ends, Zelda and Ganto's ancestor fixed all of them.
I really do like the various regions of the game, but man is it a bummer they feel so disconnected. Like, even beyond the whole go back to the sky thing, at least in something like Spirit Tracks, we see characters travel in between the various locales, trading between towns, all these little connections throughout the world. Here in Skyward Sword, though, there really isn't any of that. Everyone just stays where you first find them, or maybe you'll see a couple new characters per species, but that's about it.
I don't mind the quote-unquote backtracking in the game, personally. I mean, for one, on the second runs through, you're getting brand new dungeons, and the third, Fair and Elden completely changed with radically different mechanics, while Nehru has you explore an entirely different area within the region. Also, I'm gonna be honest, I think the whole Tears of Light thing works better here than it does in Twilight Princess. Oh yeah, also, the dungeons rock. Wish there were one or two more, but, what's there is great.
Now, we're moving on to A Link Between Worlds, the penultimate game. We'll see how it goes. I have just beaten Link Between Worlds. I like it.
Our final handheld exclusive Zelda game, Link Between Worlds, was released in 2013, and it's a very retro game. While the Zelda series sort of went retro with games before, A Link Between Worlds is very much a callback to the 2D era. And spoilers for my ranking video, but this might be my favorite 2D Zelda game.
It's a lot of fun. It's a bit shorter than some of the 3D stuff, but then so are most of the 2D entries. It's not hard. I think that's not controversial to say. That's not always what you're looking for in a game, you know? If the game is easy but fair, then what's the problem? I think it's a really good game. I think obviously the story creates some question marks with the original Link to the Past, but then again, Link to the Past already has a lot of question marks, and I think the story is actually really interesting. It's not a main focus, but it is there, you know? Being able to do dungeons in pretty much any order is very interesting. It's basically the first time you've been able to do that since, well, Zelda 1, honestly. Overall, yeah, it's just a very solid, very well-made video game. I honestly don't have much more to say about it other than that.
Good news past me, you figured out more to say, so this segment won't be less than 2 minutes long. Hopefully.
Our story begins, as most Zelda games do, with Link completely unconscious. Seriously, apparently the first sign of the hero's spirit is narcolepsy, because 2/3 of these games start with this kid asleep. He's awoken by his boss's son, and he ends up having to deliver a sword left behind to the captain of Hyrule's royal guard. Suddenly, weird white guy.
Well, at least he's not green.
He transforms people into paintings and then knocks Link out. Suddenly, Fursuit. This guy commandeers Link's house and gives him an odd bracelet in return. Within a matter of hours, he's already turned the house into a rental store, basically sent a man to his death, and has essentially conscripted you in an interdimensional war. So, you know, your average Monday.
It's funny because this series makes no goddamn sense.
This story is very interesting. We have sages in line with Ocarina of Time, with them all but confirmed to be the descendants of specific sages from that game. However, it's also a fairly direct sequel to A Link to the Past, where the sages are 7 human girls, but now one of them is 100% Azora, and another is maybe part Goron, assuming they can reproduce with humans. What?
It's funny because this series makes no goddamn sense.
Overall, the story is decent, but it's hardly the most intense plot in the series' history. The most interesting part, honestly, is the hard canonization of parallel universes. I mean, even Termina is just kind of a question mark. The sages are pretty interesting characters, and Hilda is arguably one of the most morally complex characters in the series, but otherwise, it's fine.
I guess I shouldn't be too surprised, honestly. I mean, with gameplay like this, who needs story?
I would argue that A Link Between Worlds is the ultimate realization of 2D Zelda gameplay. Not only do we not have the technical limitations that held other entries back, meaning this is the first 2D game with more than one item practically equipable at a time, but the design, combat, and items have all been fine-tuned over time to be easy to learn and satisfying to master. We have a new gimmick in the ability to merge into walls, which adds an interesting layer to movement around the game world, plus returning gimmicks from previous entries, like A Link to the Past's dual world mechanic.
In fact, there's a lot of A Link to the Past in this game, which is definitely intentional. Obviously, it's not identical. Even Hyrule's overworld, which often is treated as the same world as Link to the Past, has quite a few changes. And Loru's overworld is very different from the Dark World. Overall, I'd say the game is more something new built with the same foundation as A Link to the Past, as opposed to, say, sticking various chunks of older games together and hoping it ends up entertaining. Yes, I am writing and performing this months after playing FSA. No, I am not over it.
One of the new gimmicks of the game is the item rental mechanic. How it works is, the furry guy from earlier operates an item shop out of Link's house.
You know, because that's totally legal.
and you can get more or less any item at any time, as long as you have enough rupees for them. For either 50 or 100 rupees, you can rent these items, and you can use them for as long or as many times as you want, so long as you don't die. If you do, Ravio's little assistant will swoop in and pick them up, bringing them back to Ravio. For about 1,000 rupees though, you can buy them, and even if you don't plan on dying, that might be a good investment. You see, spread across both Hyrule and Lorule are 100 little shell creatures, known as Mai, and trading 10 of them back to their mother will let you upgrade one of your items. They definitely range in quality, of course. For example, the Sand Rod's upgrade lets it keeps its pillar up indefinitely, and the Fire Rod becomes significantly more destructive and long-lasting, while the upgraded Tornado Rod goes from entirely situational to almost entirely situational. Still, the mechanic is a very cool idea, and it's pretty fun hunting for the Mai-Mais.
Look, there's only 100 of them, and the map is the same size as Link to the Past. You might as well find them all, if only for the upgraded spin attack.
The dungeons are all pretty damn cool, since they don't use the standard find the item then backtrack formula of most Zelda dungeons used at this point. The Tower of Hera uses a vertical ascension and a journey inside and outside the tower super creatively. The Swamp Palace is arguably the best mixing of the hookshot and water dungeon yet, which is surprising considering how many times it's been tried. The Ice Ruins works amazingly if you play it as the penultimate dungeon, being an incredibly tricky and complicated maze in all directions that feels extremely satisfying to conquer. And of course the Thieves' Hideout, which is arguably the only good escort mission ever made. It's all super fun.
It really is the culmination of over 25 years of 2D Zelda games, though. It's almost completely non-linear, giving a degree of freedom not seen since the first game in the series. It takes elements from Link's Awakening's dungeon design, the Oracle game's quirky NPCs and callbacks. We've got Minish Cap's focus on collectibles, the mix of 2D gameplay and 3D visuals for the DS games. This really is the ultimate 2D Zelda. Appropriate, considering what the next entry was.
And with that, there is only one game left for this replay project. Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. It is 9:37, January the 14th, 2023, and I've just beat Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and I love it. I just love it.
Breath of the Wild released in early 2017 on the Wii U and as a launch title for the Nintendo Switch. It has sold well over 25 million copies to date, I believe making it the best-selling Zelda game ever. Like, for perspective, this game sold as many copies as any of the core Pokemon games in Gen 2. Can I be honest? I don't think it's enough.
I'm going to be clear. This is one of my favorite games ever made. This is the ultimate culmination of ideas from across the franchise, with ideas from every single game only better realized. We have the total freedom and exploration of Zelda 1 with the loose order style of A Link Between Worlds. We have the darker undertones of Link's Awakening with the combat focus of Zelda 2 and mythical treatment of A Link to the Past. We have the temporary stat boosts and remote bombs of Minish Cap, the equipable busts from the Oracle games, and the treasures of Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks. However, the ultimate victory of the game has to be how it compares to the other 3D games. Let's be clear here. I love almost all of the other 3D games, but there's at least one thing holding each of them back. Ocarina of Time revolutionized action games, but it was still clunky and slow with unintuitive dungeons. Majora's Mask was incredible with in-depth side quests and a focus on a brand new world, but it sacrificed a lot of the main quest to do so and relied almost entirely on the engine from Ocarina to function. Wind Waker gave us a vast open world to explore with hundreds of secrets to find, but everything was separated by ocean and there were only a sparse handful of truly deep locations. Twilight Princess gave us a huge interconnected world with dozens of interesting characters, but so much of that world feels too similar to truly stand out, and there's very little optional content to dig into. Skyward Sword gave us incredible regions to explore and tons of characters worth diving into, but it was all separated off to the point it barely feels like one world. Breath of the Wild takes all that, everything I love about Zelda as a series, and says, fuck you, I'm better. We have hundreds of characters with names, personalities, and unique things to say to Link. We have a giant interconnected world with dozens of distinct biomes that feel completely different. We have side quests We have side quests galore, but also a main storyline worth diving into. We have over 100 different in-depth puzzles to solve in the shrines and divine beasts, and if that's not enough, we have 900 different mini-puzzles to discover across the world in order to expand your inventory. We have incredibly varied gameplay, so you can come up with a dozen different ways to solve any single problem in the game. We have horses and swords and bows and bombs and magnetism and time-stopping and boomerangs and wands and shields and thunder and gliding and surfing, and everything just fucking works.
And hell, I'm not even touching the DLC or amiibos for this project, which expands the game even more. Like, goddamn, this is such a good game. I absolutely love it. The thing is, if you're a Zelda fan, I don't need to convince you that this is a good game. You already know. Instead, why don't I prove how much I love it? Like, say, for example, my 6-year-old 100% complete file.
This is really cool. I have now officially, about a little less than 6 years after the game release, on my basic file, Breath of the Wild, I have 100% completed the game by pretty much any conventional definition of 100% completion. So you see there in the bottom left, I've got 100 out of 100% of the map, Feral Compendium, fully complete. So admittedly, a lot of that was just, buying from the guy. I have all the champion weapons and stuff. I also have all of the amiibo exclusive gear. So you see there, got the Bow of Light from the Twilight Princess amiibo, the shield from Wind Waker, Zelda. I have Master Sword, of course. I also have the Goddess Sword from Skyward Sword, the sword from the original Legend of Zelda, the Sea Breeze Boomerang from Wind Waker, Sword of the Six Sages from Ganondorf, Smash Bros. I don't think that there are any special bows other than that in the shields. I have the Hylian shield, obviously. I also have all but 7 pieces of armor, which includes all of the amiibo exclusive armor, as well as all but 7 of the in-game armor pieces. Specifically, the 7 that I am missing are the Salvager gear, which is the Xenoblade Chronicles crossover stuff. So Salvager headwear, vest, and trousers. Got rid of the warm doublet and the Nintendo Switch shirt, and I also don't have the old shirt or well-worn trousers. All of those I can buy again if I want to, but none of those can be upgraded, which is the main reason I got rid of them, in addition to just being outclassed by other gear, generally. I haven't fully upgraded all of the armor pieces, which is a regret of mine. I wish I could say I had, but it would require me to do a lot of grinding, or, just to upgrade everything, I would need, 78 star fragments, and that on its own is just, no thank you, not anytime soon. The other regret I have for 100% completion is I have a lot of the various treasure chests in shrines, but I don't have all of them. For example, Camille, which is on the Tingle Islands, and some of the DLC shrines. I have most of them though. So I'm a bit disappointed, but that's fine. Materials and food are fine. I also have all of the key items, so you see, got all of the champion abilities, plus, because did all of the DLC. I have classified envelope for finishing the compendium. I have Estu's gift, so I collected all of the Korok seeds, and 459. If you know the numbers and do the math, that means I've traded in all of the seeds needed to upgrade the inventory, which, I have. I I have all of the monster killing medals. I also have all of the unique horse armor, which is very cool. And I have the travel medallion, which again, a DLC thing. And over to runes here. Master Cycle 0 from the Champions Ballad DLC, completing that. Fully upgraded stasis and remote bombs. I also have the upgraded Hyrule, the Sheikah sensor. So it's cool. And just to prove that I have 100% completed everything, I don't have Destroy Ganon completed with the save file, but if we just go over here, that star means that you've beaten the game by defeating Ganon. So 19 out of 20 main quests, including all the DLC stuff. 42 out of 42 shrine crests, which is very nice. 90 out of 90 side quests. Yeah. And of course, with all of that, you can tell I have all of the memories, all of the EX memories from the Champions Ballad DLC, as well as all of the memories from the base game. So, yeah. Is it true 100% completion if I haven't fully upgraded all of the armor? It depends on your definition, but by speed running standards, I have the fully upgraded Wild set, and the fully upgraded Champion's Tunic. So, yeah, I would say that I have, officially speaking, 100% completed all of Breath of the Wild.
Will I ever go back to this, my first ever Breath of the Wild save file, and fully upgrade the armor? I mean, I don't know, I am pretty autistic about this game.
I think I'm running low on data. But I did it. 3 months. 3 months of Zelda. God almighty. I may have driven myself a little bit cuckoo with this project, but I enjoyed it. I enjoyed it a lot.
I think if there's one thing I really appreciate about the Zelda series, it's that every game in the series is so different. Even games I don't like Four Swords Adventures, it's still trying something new, still experimenting. Series like Mario or Sonic or Pokemon all fall into patterns and repetition at times. But The Legend of Zelda has never been that, and I absolutely love that. I love that this series contains multitudes. Like, every game in the series has something different to offer, something new to bring to the table. Even games that are intended to be almost identical, like the Oracle games or the DS games, still have major differences. And honestly, I think that's why so many of these games are so amazing. That's why this series is so good. If you keep doing the same thing over and over again, if you refuse to experiment, you never grow. You know, even in biology, you need to mutate in some weird ways if you want to evolve, right? And that's why I love this series. Alright, that's a wrap. Zelda series retrospective complete. Okay, let's clean this all up. God almighty. God, how long has my living room been like this? Oh, God. It's been going for over half an hour now. We're not even past the lake past. This is gonna be hell. This is hell. This is my hell. This is my personal hell. I've created it for myself. Oh, God. Oh, fuck.
Of the modern Zelda.
Why did you do this? Why did you do this, Sorio?
Anyways, we get the Ocarina of Time, roll credits, open the so we pulled the sword and then so now we have to go around in the future cleaning up Ganondorf's mess and saving 5 of the stage. So now we have to go around in the future cleaning up Ganondorf's mess and saving 5 of the stage. There are also some changes that were intended to be quality of life. Quality of life. Jesus. I swear, if I don't actually have a speech impediment, I'm damn close. At no point in Ocarina of Time does Ganondorf claim the Triforce of Wisdom or the Triforce of Power. I have to... God, I got that one super long.
We meant, Ganondorf. I hate myself. Come forward and the radically different Zoras we meet. Past Sorio, I'm going to wish I could kill you, but I can't. The best I could do is create future Sorio, but then you'd be pissed off at me. Oh god, okay. Probably lead to a major catastrophe. I have been awake so long. But that's only because of the nuances of Earth's atmosphere. No, ecosystem. Ecosystem, not honestly. Okay. Including 2 full makes.
For both the Switch and the Wii, developers have to build game...
I have just completed the...
So maybe that's why I enjoyed Wind Waker so damn much.
Like... I don't know how to explain it right now. Because I've been up all night. Probably.
And to think, all this could have been avoided if your sister... And to think, all this could have been avoided if your sister had just not moved. Yeah, I'm fully just gonna move this down here. Just... I'm bare feet for this recording. Why? Like the map for the map for the details. Okay. Even Windfall is so dense and detailed that it's easy to get lost and just straight up forget where. I hate myself.
The result is a game that looks like, while a more observant and intelligible play. The problem is that this just made the story even more.
Fun fact, flagship. Flagship.
I think it was a little bit better than Oracle of 8. No.
And that with the Dragon Skull Dragon Skull. Not in this game.
One, a direct sequel to Wind Waker for the Nui. God almighty, I'm so fucking...
Plus, they're magnetic, so the requisite fire temple gives you magnetic walls you can rock. I have a speech impediment, I think.
God, this is gonna look really weird in the edit, isn't it?
First off, we have the Ghost Lantern, which makes the post. First off, I was looking right at it and I messed up. Again, the game works with this control stream.
You see, the train tracks that line the land have been disappearing, and Zelda suspects the Chancellor is up to something. 5 minutes.
Whirlwinds, Wits, and Wands is also the title of my new Western Harry Potter satire. Take a lot of pot shots at J.K. Rowling in that one.
That leaves 5 items for the dungeons. That leaves 5 items. God, I am bad at this.
Secondly, the main request? No.
Very detailed and in-depth settlement, and then a bunch of items. I am so bad at speaking. Why am I trying to make this my job?
You're still here? The show's over. Go home. Oh, God, I am an idiot. Alright.